Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Today we have the special pleasure of having David Gornoski. Is that correct pronunciation? Last name, Dave? Gornoski, okay. I was going to ask before I should have. David is the host of A Neighbor's Choice in Central Florida, a show that looks at politics, science, and culture through the lens of Jesus' personhood revolution. The show airs by radio. He also has exclusive podcast online and a film series called Things Hidden. David has interviewed personalities like Ron Paul, Jordan Peterson, Slavoj Zizek. I don't know if I said that right. It's a crazy name. I know who it is, though. David has also written multiple essays and columns promoting Jesus' nonviolent ethos and personhood revolution for publications such as Daily Caller, Town Hall, American Conservative, and Fee. I personally found him on Uber Boys podcast, where he elucidated key points critiquing the Western Church, all in love, guys, while expertly navigating Uber Boys, Nietzschean philosophy, and remedying the fallout present therein. Points on recognizing Christian scapegoating and other furtive habits of the church were discussed. David has a fundamental approach that brings the abstract Jesus into a more vital incarnation. All this without dismissing the abstract, but honing the focus to appropriate action and progress in the church. Welcome, David. It's nice to have you. Welcome, David.
Thank you, guys. Glad to be here.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to that introduction, or did we cover it? I pulled a few things from your website to make sure and be thorough. But
that's pretty solid. You know, I mean, what we're trying to do is to introduce a new approach to. It's not a new approach, but it feels new in the context of our current events, in which Christianity has been relegated as an object that people wield as a special talisman about special points, but they don't understand what it's actually all about. I think you did a good introduction, trying to kind of lay the foundation there.
Great. So I would like to. It's always interesting to me, especially guys that have been in the faith for a while, to hear about what brought them through. Like, what was your family dynamic like? Did you grow up in a Christian family? Did you find your faith on your own? How did you find the Lord?
Yeah, I was raised. I'm the son of a preacher.
Wow.
So you can understand the background there. Growing up in Florida and small town churches with Johnny Cash aesthetics. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
and
that's awesome.
You know, that's my background, and I'm happy to be a part of trying to rekindle people's understanding of Jesus's nonviolent personhood revolution, which many people think right now the last thing we need to hear about is nonviolence. But that's the paradox of the cross of Christ, is that nonviolence is not a kind of defeatist, pacifistic approach. It's actually a proactive social Aikido approach to dismantling power structures And the reason why we're not playing well is because we don't understand the Bible has just as much to say about mankind as it does about God. It's not,
That's
you have
really
a
salient.
theological framework about the Bible, you're not going to understand the Bible. It has to have theology plus a kind of anthropology undergirding what you look at in the biblical text.
Can you expound on that just a bit? Because I feel like a lot of our listeners, and in the beginning of a man's faith, they focus on Jesus and the characteristic, like the man incarnate, right? And there's this God. We want to become like Christ. But it's so important to underscore that the book is about men, and that men have a preoccupation, and they're put here for a reason. Could you describe how that's found in the Bible? Like, what does that mean to a believer, and why is that important to us?
Yeah, I mean, we're not people of the book, right? We're not people of another ideology. The biblical text is an anthology of different works, different genres, different authors, but it's weaving together a kind of a tapestry, a story that then we are called to be a part of in the text, not usually on the side of the heroes, but rather on the side of the ones who are persecuting the heroes, which is something unique to the biblical perspective in history. All mythology tells the perspective from the winner's crowd, the crowd who's roasting the victim alive. Uh, the Bible is the one that says, no, let's turn the camera back over to the individual and let's find out what is going on with this person. And once you start to show that perspective, it opens up a whole new approach to understanding what we are here to do on earth. And that includes not only, victims, but also, being able to look at the flaws of our heroes. If you look at the Old Testament, you see lots of heroes with flaws. Moses' flaws are exposed. Joseph, all these different figures have flaws. They have failures. They have misunderstandings of the true nature of God. But those texts preserve those gritty details. This is unlike anything in mythology, whereas mythology kind of creates these cartoonish heroes who, you don't see their inner flaws, or their flaws are kind of hidden in a way that we can get into later. But, the heroes are kind of like, gods are gods, and, slaves are slaves. And it's kind of a really strict hierarchy of power based on might makes right. And the biblical text is going to challenge that the whole way through in different ways.
I love that. And it gives us the opportunity to see the way that God molds us as clay, and for us to be aware that these figures in the Bible are examples for us. They're examples for us as men and their shortcomings. They're examples of the way that they find grace. God gives them grace. They're examples in life as what men experience.
And they also protect us from tyranny and the inclination for like the Uberman or the Superman. Because like even in today's world, we just did a commentary on Tate, and he is one of those like Uberman type figures where he sees it as a weakness to point out his flaws or his own weaknesses. And we see a lot of weak men in today's world that want to be strong. And we saw that in World War II. We see this in times where the people are weak, they're oppressed, so they seek to validate themselves within a strong man. And we see the way that leads to tyranny, and then what ultimately that cycle leads to. So we really want to help men today see this within who they choose to follow.
Yeah,
within
because
the story. Because we were talking about the Quran last night a lot, and we're kind of getting torn apart in the comments right now. But reading the Quran, it's an all-powerful God. It's very much there's a bit of grace and mercy in there as well, but you don't. He's perfecting all the stories. We talked about like the story of Joseph. Jesus comes out speaking as an infant and telling, basically, I'm not going to go through the things you guys are going to go through. I'm going to lead a perfect life. Joseph was told, hey, you're gonna rule Egypt. He didn't just get a dream, which was like, okay, your brothers will bow down to you, but then all of a sudden you're a slave, and then you're going through all this, and maybe that dream didn't matter, right? So you have to use faith. And you have to believe, you have to remain a good man during horrible circumstances where you are inclined to be less than,
Right.
and tempted to be sinful. So I was wondering what are your thoughts on the climate today, and as well as Christians with this sort of doom and gloom, this idea that this world is going to go away. It's in the Prince of Darkness, and we're going to have a day of reckoning, and we're pilgrims here. We're on our way out. We are going to be in heaven soon, so this place is going to burn, and our duty as men, as Christians, with the Great Commission to make this world a heaven on earth.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what Jesus did in history, okay, he's the last man of history, meaning he is the final sign of what all of humanity will act like. So when you are actually obedient and imitating Jesus's way of thinking, his way of critical thinking, his way of strength and resolve and on deterrence from lack of fear from people's hatred or social alienation, when he has his self-emptying aesthetic where he washes the feet of of those who are his servants below him. This is a framework that is modeling what humanity will literally be like at the end of history. And so when you are imitating Jesus, that's inbreaking the kingdom of heaven into earth in a very disruptive way. And so therefore you are modeling, when you actually do it to the fullest of your heart, soul, mind, and body, you are actually modeling what future humans are going to look like. You're like a time traveler from the future, and you're socially embodying a mimetic contagion, a role modeling of Jesus's behavior, his way of thinking, his way of processing sacred cows, his way of going past being enslaved to the desires of your neighbor. All of that, if you model that and actually practice it daily, you are breaking the future into the present. Okay.
That's right.
And so when you're accelerating the future coming into the present, and you are playing your role as a dutiful ally and follower of the truth and the way that is going to conquer the world, right? So when you learn to love your neighbor, when you learn to serve those who are in a lower social pecking order, so to speak, in terms of the perception, when you learn to go through that, you're able to be free and you're able to unleash your true creative potential, and that's important.
Yep, exactly. So the animating spirit becomes Christ. And I hear you talking about the scapegoating mentality that we see present in the United States. It's been present throughout the history of Christianity, with the witch trials, with the Crusades, with all of these different ways we've incorporated violence into our ethos and our religion to try and get our point across. And we've seen how it's failed over and over again. You're never going to, and this is the problem with that kind of interaction, is that the person you're trying to help, you're seeing them as an enemy. And the Bible tells us to love our enemies. So we're seeing them as an enemy, and we're trying to subjugate them through violence. And what that does is it creates a sort of delusion, so that we're now focused on the issue, which is now an enemy, and subjugating them when we should be, and it's a scapegoat. That's the word I hear you use very often. And so instead of focusing on the incarnation of Christ and being that representation here and now of the people that will be populating the earth, the end goal, the fruit of the tree being present here and now, you're instead playing by the worldly rules. And it has everything to do with being a small man, right? So you feel like you have to defend yourself against somebody. That somebody is not a person of faith, right? So we're supposed to minister to this person, not blow them off the map with bombs, right? And so this scapegoating mentality is Satan's way, his effort to try and take our perspective, our energies, our momentum, and put it on things that are just circular. They're never going to end. War is circular. And take the God-given gifts that we have to enhance this planet and waste them, spoil them, just complete and utter scorched earth policy. Now, can you describe the sort of how this works in the United States? I want you to give the audience some examples of this as seen in the church, something that they can relate to, because what I find is for us, we've sort of went through this process of learning. And for the listeners, it's kind of abstract. They hear this, they might connect with it on certain ways. It's like you come home and you had a bad day, and then you argue with your wife. Instead of being a servant to your wife, or caring about her, you take your wrath out on people, and then you start to get frustrated, and this snowballs into a way of being that is not Christ-like. And so if you could take that, sort of explanation into more of a politicking, because I see so much politics. I mean, we've had a lot of guys in the Bible study who've been led to the Lord by virtue of the news. They're guys who've heard about end time stuff, and then they see the news and they connect dots. And, for a moment, it's okay. It's kind of like, yeah, the world is evil. It's kind of like what Andrew Tate says. They finally recognize the presence of evil in the world is so prominent and so serious that they're like, okay, this must be true. But they also get stuck on that, and then they start to equate politics to action in the church. And then there's this whole defect that occurs and this obsessive thing, and it prevents the Teslas, the progress in the world to take hold. So if you could kind of transport the listener with examples as to this politicking, this huge quarry, this pitfall that you can fall into so easily and feel like you're doing the Lord's work, but in reality you're being beaten by Satan. So could you take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, you're describing the problem. One way to look at it is dualism versus incarnational Christianity. Whereas dualism, you got this separation between body and soul, mind and matter, and this kind of hard distinction between, the world of heaven and the world of earth, right? And then you have, that's what most Christianity is infected by, which that comes from Greek philosophy, right? And so incarnational Christianity is understanding that the body is just as important as the soul in Christianity. And the unseen world, which is, you could say, is what ideas represent, and these unseen forces, they're in breaking into the seen world, which is the physical and material space in history, and that we are furthering that in breaking, that merger of heaven and earth together, right? And so as heaven and earth progressively collide together through the way that we complete the work that we're to do on this earth to make this place the home of God. God established earth to be his home, and we are to co-create that together with our thoughts shaping reality, our thoughts guiding that process in a creative dance with our Creator made in his image. He wants us to participate in the inbreaking of heaven into earth. He wants us to participate in the harmonization, the complete fulfillment of the harmonization of the human species. Harmonization is just a fancy word for saying what makes us human. How do we become fully human? We're to participate in the completion of the human species in terms of its fullness, in terms of its full potentiality, its true, really unleashing its creative powers. When you have an incarnational Christianity, then you're thinking about, what should we do here on earth? Heaven is coming to earth. On earth as it is in heaven, we pray, thy kingdom come, right? On earth as it is in heaven. The unseen coming into the seen, coming into the spatial, coming into the finite, into the world of forms and shapes and patterns. So we don't have time for Platonic, idealism. We have to break into reality where it is. And when we do that, it's going to orient us towards a mindset that is hopeful. We have faith, hope, and love, right? Faith is trusting in the way of Jesus as the true way of healing your relationships and healing your traumas and failures and sins, and the collective sin of the world, the scapegoat murder that Jesus refers to when he says, I've come to reveal things hidden since the foundation of the world. That is referring to the cosmic, social, political, human world of culture. And he says that Satan is a liar from the beginning, and he's a murderer from the beginning. The lie is that accusation will be the foundation of our politics forever, our cities forever. And the murder is the way we expel and devour common enemies that we have now called scapegoats because of the biblical text giving us the word scapegoat. That wasn't considered a thing before the biblical influence in culture. You didn't worry about scapegoats. It was
I
just,
didn't know that.
if you were devoured, it was in the Leviticus ritual of the scapegoat where they come up with this pattern, which is a prefigurement of what Jesus fulfills on the cross. Before that, though, if you were in a position of being blamed by your community, there was no word to describe that. Okay. That's why Japan even has, to this day, I think they have a problem with the language of scapegoat. There's no word to translate to that because they're a society that has been more isolated continuously away from Christian framework of reality. And therefore they don't even have the concept of scapegoat in their language. And the reason why we do is because we are the children of the biblical revelation, whether we understand it or not, whether you're atheist or not. The fact that you pick a religion or an ideology is something only Christianity births into history. Prior to Christianity, you weren't to determine what your religion was. Whatever you were born in is what you were, right? You didn't have any kind of like, well, I will decide to be a Buddhist. Nobody did that. It wasn't a thing. Maybe if you're at the top elite, you could play around with philosophies, but you weren't, even they were not able to really access a kind of sense of personal agency by which they could determine what their worldview would be. I am Christian. I am a Baptist. I am a Buddhist. I am a Confucian. That framework of being a personal with personal agency, able to test and investigate worldviews, is something only Christianity gave us in the world. And the whole world now imitates that more and more. The more that globalism, which is a cheap ripoff of Christianity, but Christianity always works from below. It always infects and subverts those things which try to compete with it.
Like
and so
Levin, right? Yep.
Yeah, so globalism is trying to kind of replace Christianity as this new universal religion, but in so doing, it always ends up spreading the aesthetic of the gospel that undermines its own project while opening up a new space for humanity to encounter the Christ.
Oh yeah, baby.
In a new way. So it's really cool how that works. And the biggest problem we have is that conservatives and right wingers and anti-establishment folks, they assume the loser's position in this passion play by which they take on the role of the Roman soldier in antagonism to the Christ figure being fraudulently taken on by the leftist globalist project, right? So the leftist globalist, this is like a big dramatic play. The leftist globalist project puts on the garb of Christ in a kind of perverted way, and they use, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. And so the right, because they have not read their Bible and they have not allowed the Bible to read them, more importantly, they have not been able to realize that they are often taking that cue from their rivals. They're more interested in beating their rival than they are, leading and moving and actually having a vision for society. So they take on the role of the Roman soldier in this kind of live action role play taking place in human history, where the aesthetics of nationalism and back the bluism and war on terror and all these things that the right always finds it's a patriot act. We've got to have a patriot act. How stupid, always taking on these dumb positions, which is a pagan reaction to the false Christian martyr aesthetic of the left. And so as long as that's happening, you're never going to get the real unleashing of the power of the cross that's available. So, these things are going to take time to fully saturate in our minds. I know I'm kind of talking still in a broad picture. You wanted specifics.
No, that's great. I'm keep going, dude.
Everywhere, man.
Keep going, bro. You're doing great. I like that because it is something of the abstract, and so we do need to take it piece by piece and then narrow the focus down so that we can get these examples. So you're doing great, and this is exactly what we want our audience to hear. So keep going. Let's hear some of those. Keep going with it, man.
2 points.
So what's an example? Give me an example of something you want to see here.
Okay.
Needs further clarification.
Go ahead, Joe. 2 points I'd like to bring up for our audience just to because you brought up so many awesome points. Like that was just so dense with with truth on such a deep level. Was the body is as important as the spirit, and sort of using like if the body and the spirit would be like earth and heaven, right? and aligning those two, right, and making heaven on earth. I thought that was an amazing example and something good for our listeners to sort of internalize, and that we're here as Christians to bring heaven on earth, to co-create with God. That's what the plan is. And another thing. So to answer your question, or to bring up like another topic.
Well, I was
listening to Pints
of Aquinas.
Pints of Aquinas, and who was his guest name?
Mike Jones from Inspiring Philosophy.
Right. Everybody, he said this, and it really affected me, was everybody wants Jesus on their team. It's like everyone can have this on their team, and it's sort of diluted Christianity to everyone else. And we heard this on our podcast last night. A lot of the Muslims are like, well, Muslims, it's the last religion, right? Because they have hard stops, they have boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. They look at Christianity through this secular, worldly lens where everyone's a Christian, and you can just jump on the bandwagon because Jesus would approve of this, and Jesus, and they say that, and it's like they're getting seen as Christians. The world's interpreting them as like, okay, anyone can be a Christian, anyone can do these things, and it's diluting.
Well, the problem is the qualifying factors that are being left out. So being a Christian is qualified by what people think being a Christian is, and that unfortunately has been diluted. So when you're trying to take those qualifying factors and apply them to the people you see, and obviously this is a fallen world, unfortunately, so the media is going to show you all of the most crass, cheap examples of Christianity possible. Now, going back to the Roman, the way that the scapegoating takes place, because I think that this is extremely important for us to realize in ourselves, because people, they're aware in the church of the renewal of the mind, and they say this takes over, and they have their prayer time, and they read the word, and they start to see the subtle changes take place as their paradigm of importance, their paradigm of hierarchy is slowly changed and lobotomized and brought into that of Christ's. However, I believe, and after hearing your podcast with Uberboyo, a lot of the scapegoating happens in politics because people have this initiative where they know they have to be a part of it to some degree because they have to be responsible. They have a vote, right? And then there's wars, and then there's the enemy. And then how does a Christian navigate those things without scapegoating on this? Because it's really laziness. I mean, ultimately, the brass tacks of being a man of God is loving God so much that you can love your neighbor, and then loving your neighbor is a person it's not that interesting from a carnal point of view, right? It's washing the disciples' feet. So that excitement that you have while serving your neighbor is nothing compared to the excitement of feeling like you're part of some global agenda. And there's all the excitement of a war and all the excitement of two sides and, scoring points and who's going to win. And so the scapegoating occurs because of that perception of we have a responsibility, we have to vote, or we have to have some impact here as the Christian body. This is sort of our voice in a global arena. So how does one navigate that without falling prey to scapegoating and that being the primary focus?
Well, the modern state is a vestige of pagan human sacrifice. Okay, so when you're playing by the ball of we get one little vote in this ritual human sacrificial institution, and that's your main agenda for advancing Christianity, you've already kneecapped yourself from the very beginning. You see what I mean? Like the idea that your vote is your primary mechanism for administering a kingdom vision is not the right framework to have.
Let that settle in, guys. I mean, it's hard to accept that kind of stuff at first.
Kingdom vision, right?
I'm not saying that. Look, I'm kind of nuanced on this. I used to be more vicious against voting, but I've tried to understand that,
time
there's
and place.
A pragmatic incrementalism that has to be afforded here to some degree. Although once you do that, we end up going really back to the same problems we're still doing over and over again. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I still have to allow for it in my conscience. It feels like there's times in which it is a part of what you can do, but it's really as important as, what color your toothbrush is, man. I mean, it's not that important. That's how you should think of your voting. I mean, if you're going to vote, you should take, I put it this way. It's a paradox there. Voting, I believe you should have a license to vote because it's a deadly weapon on a mass scale, right? If you're participating in throwing your little stone amongst millions to perpetuate whatever the hell John Podesta wants to do. Okay, because that's what you're doing. When you're participating in that, there's an ignorance there that we have had, but God is allowing us to start seeing the sausage making of politics, thanks to the great heretic who was able to arrive in the White House a few years ago. He bumbled and stumbled like Chris Farley at an Aztec ritual, and he has broken through so much of the matrix here that it's delightful for people like me. Who, I wrote that Trump was the scapegoat supreme way years ago, 7-8 years ago, whatever. And I've been talking about the same consistency throughout, which is, okay, you have to create. So I know we're going to skip around here. We're not going to do a methodical thing here.
No,
but,
go for it.
And that's good for the TikTok generation too, right? They like to skip around.
Scatological all the way.
They don't want to go through just one little thing, at a time. They want to go through 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, But, Trump is the Chris Farley, Matt Foley figure. He has bumbled and, have you ever seen like those Chris Farley Saturday Night Light skits where he, imagine now
Van
that
down by
Trump,
the river, baby.
Now Trump is a little bit more. He's like a Frank Sinatra meets Chris Farley. Like if you blend that together, you're going to get something kind of like that. He doesn't do as much physical humor, but he, even the whole gesture thing, that's kind of like Matt Foley, where you use your bigness as a kind of hypnosis, and he knows that, and he plays into it. He's brilliant. Actually, he is really good at physical comedy in a very subtle way. That's true. But so Trump kind of bumbles and stumbles through the Aztec ritual of our politics, right? Like the moment where you say, now we rip out the heart. He's like, this is gross. It's on my hands. The blood's on my hand. This is so gross. We're doing this because we're going to try to help the sun come up. But actually it came back yesterday without doing this. And so he's like saying things you're not supposed to say through the ritual, which is ruining the believability of the ritual, right? So he says, you can take these generic drugs in the midst of a pandemic, which was nice to be orchestrated on behalf of pharmaceutical, military grade bioweapons. God knows what the full extent of that was. He's over there talking about, generic drugs, right? At a press conference as the high priest of this state. You're not supposed to do that. Leading up to the campaign, he's talking about running in the campaign, and he's talking about, we got to go into Iraq to take the oil. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to be a little muppet like George W. Bush and say we're going there to get literacy while Halliburton makes money and all these sick freaks make money in banks. You're not supposed to say we're getting the oil. That's like a guy that doesn't know how to romance a woman, right? At the bar. So Trump doesn't know how
no foreplay whatsoever.
So Trump doesn't. The reason why. It's not about Trump's policy so much. It's about the fact that he doesn't know how to stay on the mythic script, right? So he violates the mythic script so many different times by talking about the ugliness of what's going on. He goes into a Super Bowl interview, I think, with Bill O'Reilly, and Putin says, O'Reilly says, Putin's killed people. And he's like, well, we do too. What do you think we do?
Yep.
You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to do that. And he did do that. There's like some kind of weird ritual where everybody who gets elected, by the way, has to kill a member of the Awalaki family. Did you notice that?
No, that's crazy.
It's horrible. But Barack Obama gets in there. He's like, "Oh, hope and change. This completes all of our victim arcs from the 1960s. Here we go." And then he stirs that all up worse than ever. And then he goes in there, and one of the first things he's doing is killing Anwar Awalaki. 16-year-old son who wasn't a terrorist, a 16-year-old kid and his friends camping. And he did that with John Brennan, who's a darling of MSNBC, which is all about creating these hypnotic illusions that the people who watch that somehow care a damn about brown people. They don't. They support people like Hillary Clinton, who laughs as they butcher Gaddafi like a freaking sick cult in front of all the cameras to see. She's laughing about it, while 3 million people go under slavery in Libya in modern day Africa. And these people pat themselves on the back thinking that they're somehow advancing the plight of the poor and the impoverished. This is nothing but myth making in real time. But it's not effective because Jesus broke the unanimity of myth. We are not able to hide from our consciences anymore. And so all of this is about guilt and shame. And the reason why they need to believe that Trump is this heinous monster is it's a way for them to try to revivify the role of the pagan sacred in the past. The role of the pagan sacred was to project your violence into a god. or a monster who was beyond your, it's not your responsibility. This passions and violences are what we call the wrath of the gods. And so Trump, I always tell people, leftists worship Trump. They don't hate him. They worship him. He is a god to them. He is a deity for them. And that's what their whole bloodlust is for him, not just the establishment line and the mid-level managers in politics, but also the common folk who believe in the dogmas of the statecraft of globalism. They need to see that this man is the monster who consumes, all of their sins and guilt. Now they don't logically think through that.
Yeah.
They feel that way. He's their Grinch. They need him to be expunged. They need him to be cast out of the camp. And that's why, you're going to continue to see the same process take place over and over again, which is their failure to provide themselves with catharsis. They don't have any kind of relief. They don't have any kind of, satisfaction for the violence or the otherization or here we go, maybe this arraignment that's taking place as we speak.
So can you talk about the way the motivation, like how does the guilt and the shame work its way into scapegoating? Because when like you talk about the old gods, and it's so important for people to take these illustrations, these ancient illustrations, and then insert them to a modern arena because they're still going on. The labels are a little bit different, but if you have the eyes to see them rationally, as you described, like Trump being this god sort of that they're using to get out their vitriol, they need him as a vestibule for that to go into. The human condition is the same as it was back then. Back then, they had gods that they didn't always worship in the way that we glorify Jesus, right? So they had gods of war. They had gods that were vestibules for their violence, that were vestibules for their shame, that were they had transactions with them that weren't just glory and worship, because it was a feature of our fallen nature and our need to get that out. So we have to recognize we have those same things going on with us here and now. And how do we do that with wars? How do we do that as Christians with, the politics, our perspectives and objectives changing as we deal with shame and guilt? So where does that shame and guilt come from? Obviously, I know you're going to say it's a lack of the incarnation of Christ, but can you dive into that? Because I heard you talking for a while on that, and it was very insightful to be able to understand how those things have worked their way into the faith, into the brothers of the fold.
Well, you have, there's a lot there to unpack, but you have, it depends on where you want to start off here. I mean, if you look at what mythological rituals and rites of passage and so forth, and all these different kind of taboos, those were all designed to try to keep a sense of differentiation in society. So the idea of having a taboo over incest, right? This is a kind of way to distinguish, hey, this is this family and that's that family, and we're not going to have or family members, and we're not going to have this kind of monstrous anything goes, whatever we want, because that will literally cause deformations, mental retardation that can really disrupt the health of a society. So a lot of these things that we see in ancient taboos, like don't steal, and don't do all these different obscene taboos like bestiality. These are all meant to say, this, you are a human, that's an animal, that's your brother, that's your person you can pursue in a relationship. This kind of distinctions between this is this and this is that, don't mix this. All of these things ancient societies had in place to kind of limit the occasion of runaway violence and chaos, right? So when you have these moments in which people feel like they're becoming too alike, that's what tends to breed a combustible society, an explosion of all against all tension. So this goes back to the work of Rene Girard and what we call mimetic theory. This is completely different from meme theory, which everybody conflates online. You'll say, oh, I know about mimetic theory, and they spell it M-E-M or something. That's meme theory. That's from Richard Dawkins. But Rene Girard's mimetic theory is a whole different way of looking at reality than that.
Can you break that open for us?
What's that?
Break that open for us.
Mimetic theory. Mimetic theory is the idea that humans desire what their neighbor desires, that the desires that they have don't actually come from their own heart, but are rather caught. They're caught like a bug, like sniffles. You don't choose what you want to desire. Your neighbors around you are kind of selecting what you are going to be drawn towards based on how you want to be like your neighbors. This is
like
the
herd
idea
mentality, likes on Facebook, hearts on Instagram. This idea that if people are nodding their heads around us, then we're doing the right thing.
Right. That's one of the reasons why censorship is such an investment for the establishment, right? They've got to censor to make you look like there's not a lot of people looking or listening or viewing you, so that they know what incites desire in human beings. That human being, if I wanted to open up a store, at the mall, you could pay a rent-a-crowd to line up ahead of time before my clothing design, and it could be the most garbage clothing in the world, as we see of most fashion, right? But if you can incite a mimetic desire by putting that rent-a-crowd there, I mean, you can do that yourself. You can rent-a-crowd Twitter likes. You go to if you wanted to be an up-and-coming social media influencer, you could go to a podcast convention and rent a crowd, have 50 attractive young people coming out screaming your name and wanting to get your photo. You pay them an hour, or you pay them a little event fee,
right.
And then you've created a ripple effect, because others are going to look at that, take photos, and who's this person, and it's going to start creating a snowball effect, and the next thing you know, you're off to the races in terms of worldly prestige, right? So that's tapping into something that only the Bible truly unveils in human history, right? Which is all we like sheep have gone astray, each into our own way. That means more than what we generally think. You think you're going your own way, and that's how you know that you're a sheep, right? In other words, you can't fully become a human person until you realize how sheep-like the human species is. We are socially mediated creatures. We are interdividuals, not individuals. We are shaped by the desires, our parents, our siblings, our rivals at school, the books we read, Mr. Rogers, whatever it is. These things are all throwing models of things that you should desire, things that you should value, and we are kind of like a sponge, absorbing them all in, and some of them we're pushing back against, and some of them we're letting in, and some of them we're unconsciously modeling, and some of them we're consciously saying, I want to be like so-and-so, or I want to be like this or that. All of that amalgamation of role models, in other words, is what makes up your sense of self. Your self is really just a collection of role models that you've seen modeled throughout your life, that you've kind of amalgamated into a cohesive narrative for your rational brain to process. This is me in distinction from thee, right? And so yourself is really socially constructed. The left is right on that on some level. They don't take it the right way. They don't ground it in logos like I'm doing, as dependent on the revelation of Jesus. So they go off into insane ways with that. But that's what's really going on. So the Bible is trying to get us to, in order to find true personhood. That's why I talk about the personhood revolution of Jesus. In order to find your true personal creative potential, you must first accept that you and everything you think you are is mostly unconsciously taken from those around you, including those that annoy you the most, which is the hardest thing people have to do, is to recognize how much alike they are to their rivals. Hence, we have the Republican and Democrat Party, of course.
Right. And it's a humbling thing, right? I mean, like, what you see Satan do is in the garden, right? Is he's saying you're gonna, by making this decision, you're individuating, or by telling Eve you're now making a decision based on your desires.
Yeah, so Satan models God the Father from a rivalrous perspective. Right. So important. You only have two choices in life. You're going to rival God in a rival. You're going to imitate God in rivalry, or you're going to imitate God in love. That's it. That's your only choice. You will imitate, and you will imitate all kinds of little gurus along the way. But they're either going to point you towards God, which is love and self-giving and self-emptying of the illusion of yourself and all of the death anxiety that comes along with that, or you're going to follow Christ. You're going to embrace the cross, realize the death has been conquered, that your creative potential has been unleashed, and that you should not be so stupid into buying into textbook knowledge like what is the proper way to cure diabetes or cancer. When you take that see, Christianity is the end of religion, my friends. It's the end of it.
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins and those fools are the biggest religious clowns you could ever imagine.
Yep.
They read the textbooks and they don't see any suspicion there. They read a text, oh, this is all the experts tell you to do COVID, and they're just stupidly, religiously paralyzed into dumb, stupefying submission. They don't even have the ability because they're so drunk on their false sense of self, it's rugged self-determinism, which ends up in many cases being the biggest occasion for being a mindless sheep. That's why the Bible says, all we like sheep have gone astray, each into our own way. You as a sheep, when you don't recognize your sheepness, your mimetic desire construct of who you are, when you don't wake up to that matrix, that's the matrix. And that's the matrix Andrew Tate doesn't want to take. He's still caught in the matrix.
Yeah.
He thinks that he's a self-made man. In reality, he's just created another fantasy coping mechanism for the trauma of his childhood and what he experienced, which is what we all do to various degrees. And so I'm not chastising him, but the point is he's still a puppet of the matrix. Yep. The matrix gets you enslaved to your passions, enslaved to the self and to the romantic notion that if I could just get that car, if I could just get that many YouTube subscribers, if I could just get that house, if I could just get that family, if I could just get my kids into that school, it's just never ending. It never stops. That's called hell on earth.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Lewis, and by the way, and so all of this comes back to human beings were supposed to have this stuff bound up, right? Because the ancients had a kind of wisdom. There's always some kind of inbreaking of God's, natural law, whatever you want to call it. And in even the most ugly, disgusting, backwards pagan societies. But they understood that unleashing human desire without having it kind of channeled into a sense of differentiation was a very dangerous thing. Because if we are imitative creatures, we go back to the same model. A lot of folks who like mimetic theory will use the model of two toddlers in a preschool playroom, and one picks up the doll. There's a whole bunch of toys, and let's say there's a Mickey doll. They pick up the Mickey Mouse stuffed animal. Now the other toddler immediately wants to play with it. They didn't want to play with it before their neighbor modeled the desire for them, right?
It's like eating dinner with your wife, dude. She's going to want to eat your food.
Yeah, or exactly. And so what happens is so now the first child didn't care about the toy. They were just kind of lackadaisical. They pick up something or whatever. Now the other kid wants it. But as the other kid grabs for it, that makes him model his desire after the rival. So he says, no, I want it more now. I didn't care about it, but now that you're trying to grab for it, it incites my desire. It inflames my desire. And now they're going to be stuck in a rivalry where they're fighting. And I always say, well, the only way you can, maybe distract them from that is to come to a common enemy or something else to fascinate them. Maybe a puppy comes in and they start tormenting his ears and stuff like that, which is kind of like a proto scapegoat effect, right? You're fighting over the same scarce resources. You're fighting over the same desires. You don't know why. You just catch a desire and you're pushing and pulling and towards against each other. I want it. No, I want it. No, I want it. No, I want it. And then the only thing that breaks up that sameness is something that is irresistibly considered to be an other. In this case, a puppy walks in. Well, that's pretty distinct from, each other in our relationship to this object of desire. Actually, the object of desire eventually becomes kind of irrelevant at some point. As the rivalry continues, it's like at high school, they fight over a girl. But eventually the girl kind of becomes immaterial at some point, and they're just obsessed with beating the other. I'm going to beat you at the game. I'm going to beat you for homecoming king, or I'm going to beat you in whatever, friends at my party compared to friends at your party. It becomes an obsession with actually their rival more so than it does the actual object that originally incited that desire. And the reason that is because metaphysically, The Bible lets us know that we're made in the image of a Trinity, right? This is why Islam doesn't cut it, because Islam doesn't understand, what humans are actually, like. It's a very it's a kind of setback in terms of our understanding of who we are and what God is like. And so when you look at like a Trinity, right, there's relationality involved in one. God is one, but he has relationality and self-giving love as a part of his oneness. And so it reconciles the concept of the one and the many, right? The crowd and the scapegoat, right? Everything is reconciled in the Trinity, where it doesn't have to be based on violence and dominance and submission. In ancient societies, there was a progressive, mankind wanted to create their own concept of God. And in some sense, God's grace, because he gives us free agency, permits man to create dumb, in light of what we see today, barbaric, vicious, brutal forms of religious transcendent experience. So when you're fighting tooth and nail over the same object, and eventually, let's say we're in a plague, and the food is scarce because people are sick, they can't grow crops, things are starting to fall apart in society, that means bad blood. We feel that right now, by the way, in America. There's a lot of bad blood feeling and bubbling up, and at least online, maybe not as much in person often. But what happens is, actually, in some ways, that's a good point to go on a tangent. The online is kind of like a form of the sacred, in that it contains some of that violent aggression, right? It contains it on Twitter in these fights, as opposed to that energy bubbling out into violence around the streets. And so in some sense, the ugly, stupid, incessant rivalries on Twitter and these things are kind of like a virtual cathartic containment of aggression spilling out into physical breakdown of society. So in some ways, it's kind of a mediation. It kind of mediates our worst parts, and it also inflames, right? And it also inflames and stokes. And so when it inflames and stokes to a degree where it starts to spill out into negative antisocial behavior in our real lives, then that's that containment breaking. And all of a sudden that violence is unleashing into reality in a way that is distorting human relationships in a really destructive way. So going back to primordial human societies, when we're at each other's throats over scarce resources, we don't have a way to really stop that, right? We'll just keep going with rivalries incessantly. In the animal kingdom, when the wolves fight over dominance over the pack, the one who loses submits their neck, exposes their neck for the alpha wolf to bite, and the alpha wolf does not take the bite. There's a kind of recognition of, okay, you submit, we're good. Go ahead and get back in the pack, and now I'm the new leader. That's not what human beings do. We do that a little bit, but we are more rivalrous, right? If we get an opportunity to get back at you, we will get back at you.
Machiavellian.
And so, positive mimesis is a great thing. I'm teaching you music, you teach a new song, you play drums, I play guitar, we're learning harmony, things are going on that are very positive and cohesive for society, but things can also spill towards negative. And once they go negative, it's hard for them to go back positive. So there had to be a kind of unconscious remedy, an antidote to the potential chaos of runaway jealousy and envy and mimetic desire unleashed in society. Then you can imagine that human beings, if they're caught up in rivalrous imitation, they're losing their sense of self, and they're pointing fingers at each other. You can imagine, I'm imitating you, you're imitating me, point, point, point. And you can imagine that kind of transcending and singling out a common threat, a common enemy. And this could be someone who stands out in the sea of sameness, as I suggested earlier, the puppy dog in relationship to the toddlers. Or it could also be something like, someone who's deformed, someone who's handicapped, someone who is disfigured, someone who is a ethnic minority who's come from another tribe, someone who just stands out. Maybe they're too tall. Maybe they've been king too long. I believe monarchies probably came from ritual human sacrifice. Actually, that sacrifice was a institution that birthed monarchy, but that's for another discussion. But you see so much of these kind of differentiations that seem irresistibly different in some arbitrary way from the rest of the community, and to the point where the community kind of obsesses over that difference that the other has, and they start to believe you're the cause of the problem. You're disfigured, which means that you got that disfigurement because you displease the gods, because gods operate on a might makes right basis. And the fact that you're disfigured means that you don't have the right because you don't have the might to do things like we can. And so therefore gods don't like you. And therefore you and whatever you have done to get that kind of curse, you've brought that into our community, which is why our plague is happening or why the crops have failed. And so you are the cause of our problems. And so you can imagine how the problems that were between you and your neighbor as mimetic rivals, losing yourself in this endless jealousy and envy, can easily be satisfied to some extent into targeting a common threat and saying, this person, this dwarf among us, cursed by the gods as he is the one who has caused our crops. And they throw the dwarf off the cliff. Or this person, too beautiful than all of our wives. It's not fair that guy has that more beautiful wife. Too distinctly beautiful. There's something here that's not right. She's probably a witch. That explains why she's so much more beautiful than our girls or whatever. And so therefore, let's throw her off the cliff. Whatever it is, in more primitive societies, they would do ritual cannibalism, which you see now they're trying to bring back as one of the last taboos they haven't deconstructed or tried to deconstruct yet in pop culture right now. But, cannibalism is one of the more primordial forms of ritual sacrifice or scapegoating. But you can imagine that this kind of unconscious rush towards killing a common enemy creates such a cathartic release that now you are united with your rival. And so you can imagine this happens all the time. You and your family are having an argument. All of a sudden, a burglar comes in. Are you going to care about that argument anymore? You're going to say, no, stop the burglar, and everybody's going to unite together to subdue and demolish that. So the scapegoat mechanism is not purely diabolical, but it's a social effect. It's a social cathartic release that is sometimes going to nail people who are really doing wicked things, and is oftentimes going to nail people who are arbitrarily selected, but they're easy targets for scapegoating because they don't have enough status in the society to have enough people to have their back. And so
what you're describing is
handicapped people are easy targets, but God loves the mentally retarded, and that's why we have the world we have today.
So, within the scapegoating, you're describing like a pagan style rich, and you talked about this Uber boyo. It's like this pagan cycle that ends up occurring, right? Like, so we scapegoat, we find, and it's this cycle of, okay, we need a hero now to unite both sides. So like the burglar comes in the room, right? You're going to look to dad or the strongest guy in the room to lead the way. Usually it's going to be like, let's all unite behind him. At least he's a strong guy. Let's do this, right? And then we continue on with this cycle. And then we have Jesus, right, who kind of breaks, like you said, he's the end of religion. He's the end of these things. We can't have heaven on earth unless we break a certain paradigm of thinking, right? We're no longer making the sacrifices, right? We're no longer going down this path of having an enemy. Our enemy is, we love our enemy now, right? We're trying to dismantle this mechanism that leads us to the same hell state that we constantly find ourselves in, this pagan ritual that ends up having the same outcome of hell. And then the cosmogenic cycle, which Joseph Campbell talks about in his book. It's the same cycle, right? You go from heaven, then you go through a slow degradation right into hell, and then you have a rebirth, and then you go back to heaven, and then you continue on this cycle over and over and over again. Every culture has it, and you see it within all the pagan cult, and that's why we call it, we condense it all and say this is pagan, right? And what stands apart of it? What stands apart? What is the remedy? It's not your typical hero, pagan hero sacrifice, right? Or your archetype. It's a Jesus. It's Jesus, right? Now explain to us how this is applicable in working against these new idols, because people don't see this the way they should now. They don't. It's so confusing. It's like a foggy room, like Jordan Peterson says. No one knows what's going on. No one knows how to be decisive on. Okay, this is the ritual. This is the pagan. This is what's going on right now. We're getting deceived right now into falling into not loving our enemies. We're falling into this cycle. We're scapegoating. okay, but not scapegoating in the right way, right? Because you've already said that there's a duality within Christ's nature and God's nature. There's an electron and a proton around every single atom. He has it balanced out for a reason, and he has a trinity within his character, which has the two elements and a judgment right between it, right? So it allows for this balance and also this judgment between the balance to occur. So how do we see this fight? How do we orient ourselves in this battle today? And what is that battle today so that Christians can kind of, I see them as not, they're so easily hyped by Tates. They're so easily hyped by like these people. They want a picture to be like brightly painted in front of them. They want to be led, and they want something that's emphatical and charismatic and to get them motivated to know how to bring heaven on earth. Like, that is your job. It should be fun, right? That should be the goal. But they're fighting this battle and thinking hell is going to be here on earth and we're just going to die and go to heaven. So how do we help this?
There's several disconnects there.
Not everybody's going to be a leader.
Right.
And that's the taming of the self that needs to happen in our generation. Okay? Is that you got everybody wanting to be a rock star, but it's a coping mechanism because they're not all going to be one, but they live in their mind and they do nothing and they play video games.
It's like Fight Club.
Well, I'd like to underscore that. I was talking to one of our younger guys who's now mentoring and discipling an even younger guy, and we were talking about pride. And pride has places that it's always going to hide in a different place. Like, it's always going to be growing to some degree. And we talked about what we absorb and what we allow ourselves to feel like elation, good over. Like if somebody's paying attention to you, or after Bible study, somebody gives you a pat on the back, says, hey, man, great job. I liked what you did there. And the ways that you begin to feed off of these interactions begin to condition you to look for more of them if you're not careful. And this is what's the underlying current that pushes people into more of that. It's sort of the mimetic, to use your word, the desire to like be a leader, to be worshipped, to be the answer and the solution. And therein lies the confusion, because if you want to be the answer and the solution, you want to embody Christ, but then the mechanism by which you begin to do that, it becomes more and more difficult to navigate it, because you have to have precision with the way that you're absorbing the praise, what you do with that, and how do you redirect. And so the super masculine guys like Uber Boyo would say, you got your Achilles, your Hercules. These guys seem like a solution on the surface, right? And they're a scapegoat. They're not the proper solution. I believe you said on the mount of the Greek mountain of the king of the gods, Zeus's mountain, there was a 15-year-old boy's corpse found there, or his bones. And that is the baseline for these gods. That's the way that they operate. This is the pagan operative mode here, is that violence, that sacrifice. And so the Christ gives us something that looks very much like a loser. This guy barely, from all outside, during his life here, Christ did not turn into the leader the Jews wanted him to be. He was not this Roman conquering political figure that walked around cutting everybody down. He didn't do that. And so he gave us a very different template by which to be and to have heaven on earth. And so when you say the leader thing, I think very much of the way the James and John are fighting over, like, who's going to have the right hand, and Jesus has to say, well, he who's first is last. John, the baptizer, he is least among heaven, the most on earth here. And he's trying to give this and yield this what?
The reverse of that.
Yeah. So John, right? And he's giving them this paradigm of value, this paradigm of hierarchy and structure by which we are supposed to adopt. And there's the renewal of the mind, right? That's where we start to yield to what God has given us and give up it's the humility to know that we're mimetic, we're sheep. You have built into you these incredibly strong urges and desires that only God can help you overcome. And you can't find these little shelters, these little scapegoat shelters of violence, of war, of shame and guilt. You need to see these enemies as the love of your life, Because, and this is the focus really, is what I want people to understand, is that masculine Hercules, the masculine Achilles, these guys, they're not strong. The strength of Christ, the motivation that you get when you're progressing and you're doing the right things, like Tesla, he was doing these things because it was what he had to do. It was not something that the acclaim and the praise he found, and that's where we find God's view upon us being the most important thing. God sees what
you bring
do.
up a good point, because as if you're squabbling over the toy or whatever, the scarce resources, right? We're all squabbling over those breadcrumbs, right? While there's a giant cake on the table. And if our emphasis and our purpose as Christians is to have heaven be here on earth, right? Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, give drink to the thirsty, right? Help the needy, make people rich all over, like Jordan Peterson says. Like, what's the quickest way to end a lot of these problems is to make people more prosperous, right? It's because it's like the poor person in India who doesn't know where he's going to eat in the next day. He doesn't care if he's polluting. He's just trying to survive, right? It's the people that, these rich people that can hold on to these super left ideological, principles because they can afford to. Whereas it's the poor people that can't. But if you orient us away from the scarce resources into how do we bring heaven here on earth, you sort of you use that as the ultimate scapegoat, right? It's like that is the unifying factor. That is the Great Commission. That's what Christ asked us to do. He didn't ask you to go and fight for your country. He asked you to love your neighbor and love your enemy.
And that's the epitome of masculinity. So this is going to go into the next kind of, I don't know how much time you have, but I wanted to touch on this at the very least. So the feminine agenda here, sort of gynocentric society that we've been living in since the 1960s, and the need for a Christian representation of masculinity. What is that Christian? What is the deficit in the masculinity that you see? Because we have our own opinions, but since we have you, our audience knows our opinions. I would like to hear the interplay between this. What have you seen go on with this, and where do the Christian men have to man up in the correct way, not in the Hercules Achilles way? I mean, to a degree, you should be eating healthy, going to the gym. You need to be responsible for your temple, keep it clean, polished, and beautiful as you can, so you can be healthy and be responsible for your family, not be, praying to God for diabetes when you're asking for a supernatural miracle for something you could have sidestepped just by being a responsible human. Like, take care of your shit. But beyond that, as far as a masculine imperative that Christ is giving, what are we missing here? Why is this the negative feminine here agenda sort of washing out the church's spine?
But and it's not really, it's still ruled, by men, right? The men have just figured out how to market. They have weaponized beautiful feminine emotions to enslave millions of people, and they've tried to create a kind of like a maddened mob of angry women, and they know how to nurture, and it's men too. I don't think men are really responsible for this.
They are, and I want to make that clear. I want to make it clear. I want to make it clear to you specifically, since we don't have much rapport. In no way are we sort of condemning women for being responsible. We're the head of the household. This is our responsibility that we've dropped the ball on. So in no way are we pointing the finger and saying it's all your fault. We're not taking the victim play here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you're talking like some of the manosphere stuff that says
we don't. We strike out against that, because that's putting the power back in the female's hands, and it's gutting us.
Right, by imitating their perception of themselves as a victim. Yeah.
Precisely.
I mean, yeah, I don't know where to draw the story, but it's basically abandoning the incarnational, anthropologically informed view of Jesus, right? And when you don't have that underpinning your reading of the text, you're going to have a disembodied Jesus, which means it's just up to your private interpretation, and you can make whatever you want out of
It's
that.
purely theoretical at that time. There's no embodiment of it.
Yeah.
It's abstract.
And so Jesus is a person of action and a way of thinking of the world that's going to free you from mimetic impulses. And by lying to women and saying they're just oppressed, smaller in general, you're not even allowed to say that, but they're smaller in general, oppressed versions of men. Like, that's such a lie to say that to them, and then to convince them that, and then for men to buy into the egalitarianism in the church, right? They have gone along with the mimetic fad of our time and trying to deconstruct differentiation to the point which is going to unleash this undifferentiation. It's all, everything I'm saying today is about undifferentiation versus differentiation. Once you understand, I know that sounds kind of abstract, but once we start to unpack how that's really underpinning everything we see today, we will start to have a grasp as to what to do. A lot of this, though, has to do with a lot of, again, there's lies upon lies upon lies in this culture. Lies upon lies upon lies around so many different things, like the seed oil thing. I was the first radio show who was really pushing out the seed oil thing, and I brought together all of the seed oil critiquing doctors and scientists, including Ray P. and Tucker Goodrich and Georgy Dinkov, and I've got keto people, carnivore people, high carb people, all uniting around the seed oil topic. And Twitter people took it and made it a thing on Twitter, but we were doing the good fight for years before it hit that fruit, and it's only just beginning. But when you understand like that, for example, right, that's mankind trying to say, we don't need to eat an ancestral fat. We can, in a lab, create a Frankenstein fat that will be better than what nature, what God and his goodness has provided our ancestors to eat. So in that hubris, in that desire to break from history, that revolutionary fervor, which is the idolatry of America from the founding, although I like the founders, but there's an idolatry of revolutionary spirit that has crept in and out at different epochs and in different ways in our culture, and why we're being devoured by that revolutionary spirit right now in terms of our order and our ability to get along. That revolutionary spirit based on resentment is what drove us to create a lab experimentation called polyunsaturated fatty acid in the form. Now, PUFA has always existed, I should say that, but the level of PUFA that's in these omega-6 seed oils is catastrophic. It was never meant to be a fuel source. It was meant to be, at best, a minor assistance for signaling different hormones and so forth in your body. But we have turned what was supposed to be a signaling molecule that regulates hormonal endocrinal systems that we barely even scratch the surface in understanding, and then we have turned it into a primary fuel source. This is catastrophic. Animals who eat lots of PUFA foods go into torpor, they go into sleep. And the reason why I'm saying this is because you have millions of people who are struggling with metabolic dysfunction from seed oils, and the dumb right takes their cues from women. Well, I mean, what do men have to do criticizing what another man's body looks like? Since when does that what men do for a living? If you go to Russia, you ask a man, hey, what diet should I do? They say, you're a man. Why are you talking about diet? Now, I understand there is wisdom and understanding. Obviously, I'm talking about not eating seed oils, but the point is Christian mind is deconstructing the groupthinks that are hiding in plain sight that most people don't have the courage to see and speak and think through because of social pressures keeping them conformed to the herd. So a Christian mind goes in there and says, wait a second, let's get to the truth of the matter. We have been poisoned. And so this false dialectic of fat shaming versus body positivity, of left versus right, is a stupid child's play to the real deal, which is understanding that we have sickened the world for decades, poisoned their mitochondria to such an absolutely insane degree, which is manifesting all of these different diseases in different ways, not just obesity, but autoimmune disorders, mental health problems. And that's why we have an explosion of these things over the last 100 years since we started adapting seed oils to the modern diet. And now we spread that cancer to the whole world. That's why India, they always had high sugar. They always had a high fruit diet. Then they had ghee and they had different things like that. When they introduced the seed oils, diabetes blows up through the roof. And so everybody's walking into this disaster zone. We're living in a giant hospital of a society because we've poisoned ourselves with these toxic, hubristic notions that are so obsessed with that romantic sense of the self. Here it is. The lie of the self is the biggest prison of our time. The lie of the scapegoat mechanism was the lie of the previous era before Christ. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let me say that again. The lie of our current time is the lie of the self. And the lie of the past time was the lie of the scapegoat mechanism. In other words, in the scapegoat mechanism mediated times, they actually had law and order and structure in a lot of ways through lying and murdering and believing in the guilt of the victims that they would torture and tear apart. It gave them a sense of meaning. It gave them a sense of binding, which is what the word religion means, to bind together. And so that allowed people to have order in society at a small level. And it was all, like you said, the cycle always had to be re-inaugurated. But it didn't allow for the full development of the human person, right? Because the human person wasn't able to fully reflect and deconstruct what does it mean to be me. They were just so caught up in the sense of the togetherness of the sacred, society that they were in. And so Jesus breaks. He destroys the scapegoat mechanism, says, that's what Paul says, that was milk. Now it's time to get meat, okay? And so the milk is sacrificial thinking. Now, human society, since that moment on the cross, they continue to try to do sacrificial lynchings and witch hunts and different forms of that, but it doesn't create catharsis. It doesn't create unanimous believability, and therefore it's falling apart. And the more you try to sacrificially expunge somebody, the more it creates schism. So in the past, sacrifice created order. Now when you do it in light of the cross haunting your society, it creates division and schism to a horrible degree. So now, in light of that knowledge, the primary concern we should have is to deconstruct the romantic self so that we can learn how to humble our worship of our narcissism and our desires. Oh, I have to have that, then I'll be satisfied. That's where we have to work at. And so this is why the Bible is talking about working out your salvation with fear and trembling. The human species first had to work out the lie of the sacred. Now it has to learn the lie of the self, right? And as it understands the lie of the self, it will be free to then choose personal agency to construct, right? You're using agency to now construct models for the future that are based on love, on nonviolence, on unity, based on working together through creativity, innovation, different things of that nature.
Gosh, that is so awesome.
This reminds me of Samuel, when in the Old Testament the Jews wanted a king really badly, and it's the same thing. If I want this, I want that car, I want or the self, the idea of the self, because we also see a lot of young men going towards Tates, going towards these, guys who have the cars, the mansions, the girls who have this this narcissistic, instinct to self-indoctrinate all the time. They're their own best hype men, and that's what a king does. And you had this order that God was trying to bring in back then. He's like, you guys don't need a king. You already have the king. You have the kingdom coming here. You're not going to be like all these other people that need a king, right? We don't need a golden calf. We don't need a guy with a crown. We're past that. We want to move past that. We want to go into heaven. We don't want to stay here on earth in this hellish state. I want you to co-create with me a new paradigm, right? He tried to do that with Samuel, and then the people didn't want that, right?
Well,
they
even going back
to instinctually have to kill. Our battle is to kill that desire of, like you were saying, the self, to fit in with the world, to fit in with these paradigms that seem powerful, but really you're just scapegoating into the same old the same old loop of old. And then we're haunted, like you said, haunted by the cross, because we know inherently it's the wrong decision. It's the wrong decision. It's the easy way out.
Well, even going back to the very beginning, God commissions Adam to finish his work, to help him with his work. So that has never went away. And that walking with God,
to name the animals,
walking with God through the beautiful garden, the walking with fear and trembling, knowing who God is, and when the fear and trembling went away and that fruit that was not available to Adam became available to him, it was that self-worship. It was that moment of putting himself before God. Now, I want to touch on a couple of things you said. just to give some support to the importance of the seed oils. And I'll give a brief sort of testimonial on that. So my mom, our mother, she's had issues with high cholesterol. She's taken care of herself. She's went on walks her entire life. She was a ballerina dancer. She's taken care of the things she's eaten and output, exercise. And she's, about 62. She goes to the doctor. Everything's checking out fine. Then she starts getting angina and getting like very weak and low in breath. And she comes to find out she needs like 5 stents put in. So she gets those put in. They're like, you got an issue with this cholesterol. And so Joe and I, we obviously are like, okay, this is a hereditary thing. Let's go take some steps and measures here now. We're turning 30. What are we going to do to try and limit this stuff? So we go to the doctor. We start eating more lean. Nothing is impacting the metric whatsoever. We do some research, find out about the seed oils. We find out how the whole agenda happened, a lot like sugar versus fat. It's a politicking to make more money. And so we cut out the seed oils. We started eating a little more fiber, obviously, and we were able to bring that number down. Now, the really important factor is our high blood pressure also came down. So the inflammation of all of the circulatory biology inside of your body is directly linked to these seed oils. And I encourage all of the listeners, because when you take back how do you become the creature that God intended you to become? Well, you need to be healthy. Okay, so you need to start eliminating things from your biology that are interfering with, like you said, fats they're triggers for your hormones. So if you're eating the wrong kind of fats, your testosterone is going to plummet. Now, a parallel to the seed oils and to like these representations that we try to manufacture to make it's sort of this false progress is social media. So you have guys like fellowship is a commandment. You need to fellowship, be a part of the church. And unfortunately, what happens is you have all these social media, superficial representations of interaction, and what begins to happen is you get spiritually inflamed, just like the seed oils inflame your body. You're not getting the proper, and that's the cause for the mental health issues, a lot of this loneliness. Ultimately, Satan wants to completely isolate you. He wants you to be depressed and lonely, to not know that your Father is right there with you, wanting to embrace you and carry you through, and has never left your side, not for 1 second. He wants you to forget that. And so you see all these different, they look on the surface like excellent remedies, like it's going to make my life easier. I feel more connected. Look at all these friends I have on Facebook, on Instagram. Look at all these likes, but they're not the same thing as having fellowship with your brother in person, of actually working through conversations, practicing, explaining what's on your mind, what's on your heart. Kids don't know, and young men and even adults now don't know how to express things, think out loud with somebody that loves and cares for them. And in the Iron Disciples, our Bible study, that's what we do. We'll sit there and we'll open up a book, the notes, the Bible, and these guys will struggle. And we tell the guys, like, yeah, this guy has trouble reading out loud. We have to support him. We have to sit here and work through this with him. This is the uninteresting, unglamorous stuff like of the serving that you need to do. But it takes the mind to care for the good of the other, like Thomas Aquinas says, to initiate that. If he can't read out loud, then how is he going to talk about the gospel out loud? How is he going to feel confident about expressing what's in his heart, what God has put in his heart? So these are the ways that we begin to interact. And the social media and these other violations of intimacy that we have that present themselves.
Now we have AI. We have the Chat GPT. And I was looking up.
Well, all I want to say, just to finish off what I was describing is, you have to internalize this as a habit, right? What's presented as good is not always good. You need to have that be something that you're being honest with. Like, your friends on Facebook are not your friends. The food that you buy at the store is not always going to be nutritious, right? All of these onslaughts, these ways that the world is trying to take, because ultimately this is the way you build the man, right? The man is actually, we're a body, we're a spirit, so you have to build them appropriately together. Right, and then the masculinity is sort of uncovered. Christ-like masculinity is uncovered. You can sit with the kid who can't read. You can find peace and joy in seeing him progress as the kingdom is pushed further through his confidence in Christ being manicured.
I wanted to ask you about your opinion on ChatGPT, and I had went on there and did like a small kind of. Actually, we saw an interview with I think it was the CEO, a diary of a CEO, and he went on and talked with a Google guy that was working on the first AIs, and he quit. And then I went on to the app store to try and download one, and it was the top downloaded ChatGPT app was about like its advertisement was how to send love notes pretty much to your girlfriend, and that was the one that was downloaded the most. And so we're talking about social media. We're talking about seed oils. We're talking about things that make your life easier or better, right? Enrichment, right? So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, the AI is making songs. It's creating artwork. It's doing a lot of the heavy lifting that you would have like a team get together and do. Have you thought about any of like the future within this and like our role as Christians and like what to be like, how do we discern like what is good and what's bad within? How do we separate the wheat from the chaff in this? Because half the stuff is not even, you don't even know if it's coming from ChatGPT. There's no like, barcode saying, oh, this was created by AI. It's just like nobody knows. It could be a person. There's no way to discern what is from what. Seeing was believing, but now seeing is not believing. We don't know if it's seeing is believing anymore.
Yeah, it's going to create a lot of undifferentiation. I was going to say earlier, the ancient societies, they would often sacrifice identical twins when they were born because they thought it was a harbinger for a era of undifferentiation. Right?
Glad I was born in the 80s, baby.
Yeah, to God be the glory. You're born in the AD, right? So the AD has allowed that practice to go out of favor. But, it does. There's something about the uncanny valley effect that I think you guys as twins could probably help elucidate a little bit for the broader public, is that there's something that we lose ourself when we feel like our self is being eroded. Like if you are known for this kind of thing or that kind of thing, and that's your distinction, and then somebody does it, then they're imitating you, but they get so good at it that they're going to replace you, right?
Yeah.
That's a maddening effect, and it's like monkey see, monkey do. Have you ever had people do copycat game?
Tomasi and his culture, the red pill. Red pill. He created. He's the godfather, but you see him frantically, acting like the subordinate to the people that he has influenced and burgeoned. It's.
I mean, that's why painful. The picture of marriage gives us an insight into how the gospel deals with the balance between differentiation and love, right? Is that like because the whole idea of like good fences make good neighbors, right? So the idea is like if there's clear distinctions, it makes it easier for us to get along with one another, right?
Right.
But see, what happens is in the Bible we talk about becoming one flesh in marriage, and that can only be maintained, that oneness of getting along through the marathon of life, living in the same cave as another creature for the rest of your life. Like the only way you can do that is if you have healthy forms of differentiation, right? That's where we get into different role allotments. And, that's why you can't it's a lie to say that you can have a complete 50-50 dynamic. There will always be a final say. It'll either be, maybe the woman or the dad, or for things that they can't decide on, or sugar daddy government, right? Sugar daddy government comes in and makes that final say if there's a problem there, and that's all wrong, right? And so we have to learn to get past our egos, and that's the whole process of becoming one flesh, is learning to die to self while still maintaining boundaries and differentiation in a healthy manner, right? It's so important. And so when you get into undifferentiation and loss of like who you are and what your distinction is, it's going to create an environment of hyper competition, of hyper obsession with beating the other, of one-upping the other, and that will just lead into a stagnant society. Look at what we have today. Nobody enjoys merit. Everybody is obsessed with status. Everybody is obsessed with trying to show and display themselves as the most status filled person. But how that gets turned into the cruciform pattern is the fact that everybody now has to show status by pretending to be a victim. So The wealthy among us have to dress in a way where their hair is disheveled to make it look like they didn't have time to do a hairstyle,
Yeah.
comb their hair, or whatever it is. It's always trying to show that you are a victim, and that's why you get to have social status. So, you can be, a powerful politician as long as you're an ally, or, you can look like, who's that guy from Pennsylvania who walks around in basketball shorts as the senator? Like that looks like a victim. He looks like a disheveled misfit, and that becomes a feature, not a bug, right? So nowadays, because we're so Christ haunted, status always has to be mediated through a kind of like a victim veneer that has to like allow the indulgence to continue. So that's
But then
what we
have that massive pushback from like your Trumps and your Tates and this masculinity culture that's trying to go, over course correct all the way to the other side, to like, we're not going to pay attention to it's not masculine to apologize. It's not masculine to call out to your failures, or to even speak of them. It's not okay. We're going to this Uberman, which is not a true Superman. It's a shell of a man. So like we're seeing this duality occur, or this polarization, right? That's occurring right now. Yeah, and I think as you were talking about that, I heard this. Well, first when I was like really just crying out to God to understand what humility was, my mom told me to read this book by Andrew Murray called Humility. And I was like horrified by the book in the first like 3 chapters because it was such an assault on the self. Like this guy was talking about what it meant to give yourself to Christ. And it was scary to me because I felt like there would be nothing left of me. And I didn't even know who Christ was enough to have faith for that to take over. And then at that same time, the pastor I was talking to, that I'm sort of in submission to for the group, he sent me a sermon about humanism and humanism in the church. And the sermon was powerful. He's talking about how people use God because it's the best thing. You hear sermons trying to motivate people to believe in Christ. It's the best thing for you. It's the best thing for you. And it's still making the self the object of the decision to believe in Christ. And so I'm reading this book and I'm thinking about humanism at the same time. And really, it was just blown away by it. It was like it leveled me, completely leveled me. And I just really felt like I just wanted to lay on the ground with my face in the dust because I was noticing all these places where my pride was, like how I was praying to God, what I was asking for, why I was asking for it. Some of that Protestant sort of programming that's been there for a long time. And I was noticing how that just completely limits the fulfillment of the Spirit in you if you're treating God from that humanistic perspective. If you're not willing to level yourself every day in order to fight the mimetic instincts that are in you. And so when I finally completed the book, I was like, out of those verses, like when I'm weak, he is strong, you start to really connect on what that means. You start to feel power in it finally. You start to read those things and feel joy. You start to read those things and feel peace. And you're like, that's what being a man is all about. It's not that self and that worship and the Hercules and the Achilles and the likes and all those different, dynamics that play on your mimetic sheep brain.
Or the victimhood.
Or the victimhood too. I mean, that's absolutely true. But it was a great relief to me, to see that human and to recognize how much of that humanism is in the church today, and to say like, what do I do about this? Because everybody is it's those abstract concepts that are very difficult to bring. And that's why like when we're doing this podcast, when we're doing this podcast, we only have like 2 hours or whatever. And we're trying to show these younger guys, like, here's where it goes. And it's like that abstract becoming something tangible that you can see and feel. And like, that's where your spinal column that Christ is, that's where you can go, bro. And that's really what I want the listeners, the younger guys, to know, not to just stay in that spot, not to just stay in that same spot where we are pagans, basically believing in Christ, because I was there. I spent a long time there, and it sucked.
Yeah, that's why I say you got to make Jesus the subject of your life rather than an object that you can attain through some type of, uh, you know, uh, club or whatever you do that makes you think you've possessed, you've grabbed them. That's in my opinion a kind of rivalrous imitation to Jesus rather than a kind of loving and self-emptying uh, imitation towards Jesus. The one who empties the self is the one who's truly the Uberman in that way, because you're realizing the matrix of the self itself, right? You're realizing that the things that I think stir in my heart and I got to satisfy them. Once you master those passions, it allows you to do a lot of great things because you're going to be able to have reason. You're going to be able to have intuition. You're going to be able to be creative, bold, courageous, and just be a part of your local church to and if you're not getting it, then get together and have meetup groups where you work these things out. Here's what I want to see people do. I want to see people, and I mean, look, everybody's going to do their own thing, but I'm trying to throw out a few things to help push people as an example of what you could do. I think Christians should be gathered together and they should be deconstructing the deep lies about nutrition, because that's a great way to start bringing the kingdom of heaven generationally to effect. Yep. A lot of us uncovered the seed oil toxicity issue decades into our life.
But it's the Great Commission, right? Feed people.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. If we create children, if we have children that are not fed seed oils and chicken fat and pork fat, which is loaded with linoleic acid, and then we're starting to change the dynamic of the next generation, and they'll learn those habits. They'll learn that there's healthy things to enjoy for dessert rather than toxic seed oils. That actually a cookie made with butter is better for you than the corn oil or something garbage that most of these stores are going to put in. And so now you're changing habits, you're changing taste. The health food is actually way tastier, right? Now there's a debate, and that's something I'm continuing to investigate, between the Ray Peat world, which is high carb and kind of high carb, very low fat, generally speaking, or they're pro saturated fat, but they're anti having it in the levels that like a paleo, primal, carnivore.
Yeah, that all depends on where you're born and where your genetics are. Are you
exactly.
near the equator?
I bet you're right.
Far
I think
away
you're
from
right.
the equator. If you're somebody who is Norwegian descent, you're not going to do well with carbs. It's just simple. Yeah. If you're someone who's near the equator, your genetics speak towards fruit, towards towards fructose. You're going to be able to metabolize, and they have that in the genes. There's 6 different genes that will dispose you either to proper carb metabolization or not. And people need to be aware of this. And like you're saying, that's your temple. So the body is as important as the spirit. If you can't get your temple in order, that's what King David was doing. He's like, let's
get your temple in order too, right?
Yeah,
your temple, right
yeah.
Get rid of the fluoride, right?
Yeah.
The pineal gland, get rid of that. Stay out of debt. Here's my thing. I say don't ever use. I'm pretty radical about debt because I read the Bible. I think that you should not use debt. You should stay out of debt as much as possible.
Yeah,
stay away from compound interest and all these trickeries from Babylon or whatever. Like, we don't need this stuff. This is why people are leveraged. This is why people have soul-sucking jobs, because they have to pay this obscene price for a house that they shouldn't be paying in debt. If you have to rent, if you have to live in a tent, but don't stay in debt. Don't be in debt. Buy your house, buy a trailer, and then grow the land, make some crops.
Agreed.
And then put your house on, or build your house, make a tiny house if you can fit in a tiny house. I can't fit in a tiny house. Use whatever you have at your disposal to stay free, so you're not leveraged by the matrix. Get in touch with local farmers if you don't know how to grow food yourself, and support them. And make sure that they're feeding their animals proper foods, because sometimes local farmers are still giving the garbage.
That's so good.
Food.
That's so good.
These are practical things you can do. I can't say this enough. Stay out of debt. Stay out of debt. I've dined. You ever remember? You're Florida guys, so wrestling like Dusty Rhodes. He said, "I've dined with kings and queens, and I've dined on pork and beans, and I've never had to have somebody ask me what my credit score was when I was talking to a billionaire. I can tell you that. I never had to have that when I needed to do what I needed to do to achieve some really awesome things that I've been able to experience in my, my life as it has been." And so all these things, and understand something else. This is something important, that, there's that Napoleon Hill book, Think and Grow Rich. Have you ever heard of that or read that? Or it's about this, and it's the birthplace of what we get, this self-help stuff, right? And I think that there's a lot, obviously, here I am quoting from anthropology texts. Obviously, there's a lot of things we could poke holes at with the self-help world and where that goes, right? And so that's the obvious knee-jerk response to that statement. But there is something true to that, right? That God, when we talk about being in the image of God, and that our thoughts and the relationships that we have manifest reality, that the desires of our heart can be incarnated into material space. That is true. That's actually true. And just because a lot of people who know that use that for wicked purposes, including occultic practices or slave to money, doesn't mean that power is not real. And I think it's kind of a psyop that so many sects of Christianity have been told, stay the hell away from that stuff, right? That's not how God works. They've been told to stay away from it. And then what happens? All the immature people and worldly people and diabolical people have free reign to lean into that ability to pull evil into the world. Now they are using a much more darker, more primitive form of what God has allowed when he says, pray as if it has already been done unto you, right? That's what Jesus says. He says, when you pray, pray as if it has already happened unto you. I believe that. And I don't believe that that's name it, claim it stuff, right? Name it, claim it stuff goes into a dumb direction, but I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is I have seen it happen many, many times where, in your life, you can have a vision and pull your energies and your focus towards it and get your network to support that. And make sure you're checking it with God, and make sure you're checking it with, constantly with discernment, so that you're not smuggling in, because so many people do. Look at I don't want to pick on, but Mike Pence. This is a guy that every time he speaks, he's talking about God told him to do this, and God is this, and God is that. I'm sure in his mind he thinks he's got a wonderful representation, but whatever he's been magnetically attracting into his life, it has resulted in a pretty loyal service to the establishment, which is harming God's people. And Jesus said, and through the words of James, his brother, that true religion is to take care of the orphan and the widow. And I don't think Mike Pence, in his heart, in the worldview that he represents, is really pursuing that. If so, if he was, he would say, abolish the Federal Reserve. He would say, get seed oils out of our lives. Or he'd ask somebody that would know about it, and he'd educate himself before he speaks. He would say, abolish the FDA. He'd say, here's a path on how we can do it in the process before we abolish it. But here's what we're going to do to get people off this sinking ship. He would say, no more war in Ukraine. He would say, God forbid tearing apart the church in the name of some stupid god like Demos. Demos is a dead, dumb god. We don't worship Demos. We worship Jesus Christ, Mike Pence. It's time to wake up and stop using Jesus Christ to smuggle in false, dead, dumb gods that have been defeated. So that's an example of, you can have this kind of, again, here's that bifurcation, this disembodied Jesus stuff, where you can talk about Jesus is helping in my personal life, but yet he doesn't do anything in reality. I'm still allowed to go along with a wicked war. I'm still allowed to go along with the money changers. I'm still allowed to be like Bill Barr and lie about what happened to Epstein and then call myself a Christian. Come on. How could you be so pathetic? But yet they're in a special position. They're in a position that allows them to justify heinous things, because that's how sausage making of power works. Well, guess what? Jesus said power is made perfect in weakness. That's why we're going to dismantle those empires. And if we understood what our power was in that weakness of dismantling empires, we would be able to get past these problems faster. There's a lot of young men in the world who have never heard Christianity talked about the way I've talked about it today.
Yep.
Isn't that a crime? Isn't that a crime?
It's a crime. I was about to say, that's why everyone looks at Christianity as being gutted. Yeah. They don't have this representation. They don't have the incarnation.
They'd want to follow if they heard this message. It's not
like have purpose. They'd be motivated. They would have purpose they could utilize in their life every single day. That's that picture I wanted you to paint for people today. That's what the kids need. That's why we started Iron Disciples. It was like, guys need to get healthy. They need to get physically strong. They need to eat correctly. They need to get together. And iron sharpening the iron. It doesn't have to be at a church. It's where two or more are gathered. Have a house gathering. These are options for you. You don't like church? You don't like the church down the street? You have some friends, get together, start your own church in your room, in your house, outside, at the beach, someplace. You can do it. These are options.
I want
They're
elementary
available to you.
kids and middle school kids deconstructing mimetic desire. Don't you think that's possible?
Oh,
Can we have an
100%.
America where before mimetic desire gets you caught up and chasing after the stupid stuff, that as young as possible? I don't know what it is. You know, everybody has their own awareness pattern, but you know, I want 5 and 6 year olds, 7 year olds, 8 year olds. It says that's what education is about. It's training up your children as you go along the way. It's about actually imitation in a concerted way, in an intentional way. It's more about, really, in some ways, it's really about a kind of apprenticeship. That's what education.
That's what I was saying yesterday. I agree. That's where you're going to get the actual, like back in the day when you'd apprentice with a goldsmith, you're not going to learn. You're going to learn the beauty, like the fine brush strokes of how this man does his craft. You're not going to get that in a college. When you spend time in a family unit that's devoted to Christ, a 5 and 6 year old are going to have that in their DNA, their spiritual DNA, by virtue of looking at their parents. So that is a critique on the Western church, is because of that mimetic need to follow up with the Joneses. All these churches have MLMs rampant throughout. Everyone's trying to make money on each other. It's turned it into a very poisoned person of the church. The bride of Christ is diseased. And so there is a chain of consequences present here. And the Bible outlines it, but you have to see the symbolism and you have to read through it. You know, get your body being healthy, having the discipline to keep a healthy body in today's society, the discipline to go to the gym, take care of your temple. If those things happen, you'll be able to have the discipline to sit down with your brothers and have discussions about why seed oils are bad, right? Get on a panel, start campaigning with these things. Once you have it controlled and locked down in your own life, you can start to have those discussions with your brothers and see the progress happen. But it also happens to be the joy that we have that the church has been stolen from. That's the joy, is sitting there and talking and having that fellowship, real fellowship, where you're not listening to an hour TED talk about how you're going to go face this week again, you know, and then you leave and you sing some praise and worship songs. It's so incredibly depressing because it just repeats itself and there's no progress happening.
More moxie to get back into the machine. You know, that's all it's doing.
Well,
and that's
I think
that's why when you have sacrificially idolize, when you have church structures of various types that are still sacrificially blind to the mimetic dynamics that's going on. You create the occasion by which the gospel will be found outside the camp. Jesus Christ was murdered outside the temple, right? He was outside the camp. This is all, you know, the great, exciting, creative works are going to happen kind of in the wilderness, so to speak. Like you think about, you know, the people of
Paul
Israel,
and Peter, John the Baptist.
People of Israel had to be called into the wild wilderness before they got their mojo on, before they started understanding the dynamism of what they could be a part of in terms of like a vision for the future. And so you can't expect these corporate churches, unfortunately, to really, you know, but you know,
well, that's why we've done this with it, because you have to have like, interestingly enough, it wasn't the church that was the sort of nest where the iron disciples began. It was the gym. Like Mike and I met because we suffered in the gym together. We also had that binding union. And we loved apologetics. We talked about Ravi Zacharias, all these different, Jordan Peterson. These different things helped to bind us together.
Outside
and what we noticed,
the temple.
Outside the temple,
in the wilderness.
And what we noticed was that there are so many other guys that are like this outside of the temple, right? But they go to church, but there's this underlying current of desire. Like we said, it's nebulous.
It's like they go to
background.
church and they're kind of like, they're just kind of sitting back there. Like,
they know.
You know,
They know. And the thing is that bubbling inside of them, it's like this it's not festering, it's bubbling, it's power, it's energy that wants to come out, is something that we're noticing. It's like it is so present in the church today, and it's something that demands us to have personal relationships. And that's the hard part, because people are so used to social media and these kind of things, that being vital to your brother, sharing things, the iron sharpening iron, the sparks flying, this is all new to them. They're attracted to it. They like it, but it's also messy. It's like Francis Chan says, church is messy. But in that, they start to see that by facing themselves, that inner warrior, the warrior that Christ was when he was in the desert, you know, starving. That same warrior that says, I want to fast to pursue God. that self-humiliation, to desire to find God through self-humiliation and your brothers together, that is unknown. That is the wilderness of the church that they have not yet went into. That is the source that God wants us to start tapping into. And that's why I think, like you said about the leaven in the loaf, like it's going to spread, man. It doesn't matter. It's going to spread. The leaven will spread.
The 99 Thesis and the churches, and trying to go in there and like save the Catholic Church. Like Luther didn't do that. He went and he's with a freaking nail, went on in 99 Thesis, escaped, started his pub, and he started something new. I think that's what we have to do. We worship a living God. We don't worship a dead God. There's going to be constant revelation, and we're acknowledging that now, and it's starting now. You see it starting in the manosphere and the red pill, like this movement with masculinity that's going on, and now there's the application. There's like, okay, guys like Tate are looking for a God. They need direction. There needs to be a higher power here. We have all this data, but what do we do with it, right? We know that we just can't become the pagans that this data is giving us if we're gonna transcend it. It's going, and guys know this inherently. They're like, we're going to become the shit we hate if we're going to do this. We're going to be, and the women are going to get worse, and the men are going to get worse, and everything's just going to get worse. Yeah, it's going to be a shit show. So there's this orientation and this failure. It's happening now. I see it happening now, and I see it, like John said, it's happening in the wilderness.
I see there's
happening with guys going to the gym. It's happening with guys eating better, and it's happening with guys inside of their homes, getting together on the forums, getting together on all these social. They're like you said, the social media is a double-edged sword. We have guys on our Discord that are getting together all over. Guys in Tennessee, guys in Mississippi. They're starting Bible studies. They're reading the Bible. Yeah. They're not going for some devotional. They're like, let me crack this thing open myself. There's guys that are actually going for source material and valuing it highly.
And I see there's another bracket that has been of interest to me a lot, because I saw the hippie revolution, and the Protestants kind of gravitated towards that, and the orthodoxy and some of the more restrictive austerity of the church. The baby went out with the bathwater, and all of a sudden you have nightclub hangout, TED Talk sessions, and it's nothing to do with what the Bible talked about, dudes hanging out. Like the 12 disciples were arguing. They were being honest with each other. They were working through issues with each other. And there's a sect in the church that it's a regress, and I'm worried about them, because it's like, don't go backwards because you think the church is falling on its face now. We need to progress through this. It's because of these are the new presentation of challenges we don't need to go backwards. We need to go forwards. And so I'm seeing a lot of these guys in the Protestant church, they're going back to the Catholic or the Orthodox, and they're finding some kind of soothing. They're being soothed by it, because it's like there's this idea that we're going to fast together during this month, or we're going to suffer together for this reason. Now I'm forced to actually tell this priest my confession. I have to tell him my sins. I have to know that there's, that I'm forgiven, but it's not a consequence eraser, right? And the Protestants have confused all this, so they're desperate for that interaction. And I see them sort of migrating, and it's been attractive to me too, or into Islam as well. And so what my dream is to see, not necessarily the Protestants or the Anglicans or any more of these, figures of titles, but to see the church wake up in a way where we're suffering together, we're fasting together. These things, it's not like, we're going to fast and pray for so-and-so. It's like we do this on a regular basis, like you said, to differentiate ourselves from society in the way that we are encouraged by our faith and the sacred nomenclature that's there. Like, we're defining grace through these actions. We're defining mercy through these actions. We are defining it by suffering together and taking care of our temples so that the world sees the light and they're attracted to the light, not just this sort of humanism and self and self and self. And now I'm inspired because Pastor so-and-so told me this, and I'm going to get through my next week. So the younger men in the gym, we found they know what it's like to go into the red and do these last reps and really kill themselves, and they're cheering each other on, right? And that's like a little mini, they carry that into the spiritual dynamic, and they're able to work through. They want to talk about the seed oils. They want to talk about some of these issues. They see each other burning out the last rep, and that burning out is like that burn of the self. And it's amazing because the younger guys can align that. They can actually see that. And it's like that's what Satan doesn't want you to see. So it's powerful. And that we're with you on that, man.
Yeah,
That is our.
They need to, churches need to be, see, the future of the church will be more Catholic than the Catholics.
Yeah.
It'll be
like
more Orthodox than the Orthodox. It'll be more evangelical than the evangelicals. It's going to one up all of this stuff. Right. And I'm not calling for some kind of, globalist ecumenism or whatever. It's going to be something we can't possibly conceptualize into words yet, but we'll see it. Maybe, if we live long enough, you'll see a little bits of that. And if you do your job, if you do your job, you'll see a little bit more of it. Remember, Moses didn't do his job all the way, and he didn't get to see the full reality of the Canaan land that he was supposed to be able to see. Right? He didn't get to go in it. He just got to see it from the peak, and then something happened to him up there on the mountain. But that's so I tend to stay away from talking about Christian debates, because it's a total and for my mission, for what I'm called to do, it's a total rabbit hole. Yep. I don't mind having those conversations privately, but I'm trying to help advance the love of the good news, man. Like, here's the problem. I don't care what tribe you're in. Unfortunately, when you have a disembodied theological framework of the Bible in Jesus or church, it doesn't often look like good news. Like, if you really see what I'm talking about, it's the most exciting thing in the world, because I'm not just talking about, most of the time good news is mediated as, well, here's the good news. Like, God was going to tear you up. It's like a computer program. This is how it's usually presented, in various ways. Like, God is perfectly holy. He can't stand to be in the presence of sin. That's his nature. He's just too good. And therefore, you, because you fell and you make sins, you're dirty. So God loves you, but he can't be around you, because if he allows you to come into heaven, he will cease to exist in that state. So it's like a computer algorithm. So therefore, God figured out a code by which he will come into humanity, send his son, and he'll be perfect because you can't be. And if you believe the right things, or you do the right rituals, or you join the right representation of that man's mission, you get part of that. You get that status put onto you. You get to be a part of God's love in heaven, right? All of this is focused on you, the individual. Notice that. It's all focused on a soteriology, which is looking to get to heaven rather than heaven coming to earth. And so it fits very nicely with our therapeutic, moralistic time, where it's all about me, and my traumas, me, and my sins, which is a big part of it. But if you don't have a vision to animate you, you don't really have any incentive to get up and start figuring out how to be nicer and kinder and more patient and more Zen-like in the face of danger, and more, letting things pass through you, and desiring the right role models, and desiring those role models for the right reasons, and ultimately desiring more and more to be Jesus. And so you'll end up, as I've said before, staying in the boat, while Peter and the rest of the disciples are staying in the boat, and they're afraid to be Jesus. I have had people tell me, don't try that. You're not Jesus. You are not Jesus. They get mad, right? Because everybody would rather have a form and fashion of Jesus, which is more in their image. And so we always want to make Jesus more in our image, rather than allow his image to just reflect in the way we approach life. He says bold and courageous things, and we say, oh yeah, that has nothing to do with what he does on the cross. Like, if all it was a divine algorithm problem, that God cannot stand in the presence of unforgiven, like of sin and stuff like that, and therefore he had to have Jesus, to look at Jesus instead of you. If that's all that is, then what does that have to do with get out of the boat and walk on water? Like, what, like all these different things, those who live by the sword die by the sword. What does it have to do with an algorithm problem of God's existence existentially? Like, what does that have to do? These are all kind of disparate little nuggets that we compartmentalize because there's no cohesion to the narrative. But if fundamentally the Bible is actually really interested in like how human beings conceive of themselves and how they relate to one another and how they deal with envy and how they deal with like practical matters and like how they deal with building a society that lasts, how they deal with anger, how they deal with violence, and that everything in Jesus' life is about solving that problem and then allowing us to go do it ourselves. Once you see that, it changes everything. Yeah. Once you understand all those dying and rising God myths are just cheap graspings of humans still trying to fashion the divine in their own image, but still in their error, still glimpsing at what is to happen with the true hero of history coming. Once you start to see that, wait a second, dying and rising myths always created unity. That's why Horus survived for thousands of years as a god that transfixed the transcendence for the Egyptians. And that's why they gave sacrifices to Horus or Isis and all these different figures. But Jesus's resurrection is told from the vantage point of the victim. Jesus's perspective is told from the perspective of the one who was murdered, of the individual, not the crowd. See, Horus's story was written by the crowd. His story is written by a dissenting perspective of the crowd who admits that they themselves were swept up in the crowd fervor and betrayed him when he needed them most. And so Jesus's perspective changes the orientation of the camera angle of history from that. Now, isn't this more exciting than even the Jordan Peterson? Isn't this more exciting than that? I mean, Jordan, this is like, we're getting to the good stuff now. The camera of history changes. Now, what 15-year-old kid sitting around playing video games wouldn't like to hear that?
Yeah.
They're playing their video games. Man, this is boring. Church is boring. They just sing love songs that sound like Kesha music. I don't want to do that. That's dumb. That's boring. And they're over there playing video games, longing to be a part of reality itself.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. You know,
just
longing it, bro. Bubbling over.
Yeah, they're building little civilizations and cities. That's what they're supposed to do.
That's what they want to do, man.
Supposed to build heaven on earth.
Jesus is a stonemason. That's why you like Minecraft.
Yeah.
This is we want to build stuff. The Bible begins in a garden, it ends in a city, and now the only limitations is that we're afraid of the social alienation that takes place.
That's right. You nailed it.
Challenge the groupthink myths of our time.
We don't want to differentiate ourselves. Yeah, that's exactly right. We're not taking it seriously enough to actually see some growth. It's again that just comfortable. You're never. The point that I like to make to the younger guys is you got to choose your hard, bro. Like, you're going to sit there and not do anything, and that is ridiculously hard. You're going to have to wake up at 40 and just deal with the baggage, bro. It's going to come. You're going to deal with it.
Embrace your weaknesses. Sick. And, use your weakness to the glory of God. If you stutter, then write the best poetry and stutter it out to the glory of God.
That's right.
Watch people haunted by the cross use that as a feather in your cap. Don't you see? You embrace. It doesn't mean you embrace sin, but you embrace when you talk about your failures, because it's not just the fall as it pertains to sin. It's the fall as it pertains to mitochondrial dysfunction, diseases. You're too short. You're too big, whatever it is. You've got these things that are holding you back. You're too American, by the way. That's a big weakness because it's hard for a rich nation to enter into heaven. Did you know that?
I mean, that's why our first and foremost is humble ourselves like that.
We have a big weakness of being Americans because we can't see the reality of the radical electric energy of what the personhood revolution of Jesus is all about.
I mean, the people. I love the portions in the Old Testament where you see the leaders put on sackcloth and ashes. It's like they actively go out and become the waste person in the street to get aligned with the issues that need to be held. Because they know by staying in their opulent palace, nothing is going to change with their perspective. They had to actually put their bodies in a place where their rationality could be conditioned so they could deal with problems. I love that stuff. And the younger guys are they want it too, man.
My brother and I, last year we started fasting. Every month we do 3 days. And it was so hard to do at the beginning. I mean, it sucked. But now we do it. We look forward to it. I love it. But it's so hard for people to even try to do it. They're like, and they do it once, and they're like, man, that was but do it again. But then do it again, but then do it again. And then pretty soon you've rewired your brain, and then you find out there's all these other benefits that come along with it. Why the hell wasn't I doing why? Of course, all the smartest people before Gandhi, all the prophets, Jesus went 40 days, Like, of course these guys are doing this stuff because they're trying to get their shit in order, and they're taking on serious tasks because that's what men do, and that's when men feel the most alive. And that's how you learn to sacrifice, how to be a man, how to incorporate and like invite this system, the paradigm, the Christ paradigm into your brain, because otherwise it's like, it's just so out. We live in such a rich nation. Like, there's TikTok just waiting to, like, distract you. There's like all these, like, titties everywhere, man. And it's like, you cannot focus. There's food everywhere. There's all these like distractions. So it's like, if we're going to get strong, we have to start incorporating these things, and then know how, like, glorify them.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Say
like,
no until it feels
great.
good. Say no until it feels good. Have faith that that's going to happen. Like, now when I fast, I see it as a mini vacation. That's how much I look forward to it. I enjoy it so much, not only because of the spiritual connectivity I get to during the month, I get to place issues and I get to put them on my list and actually cry out to God. That in itself is amazing, but the health benefits, all this stuff stacks up. And it's something you have to pay attention to, because, like, when I look at the younger guys, they are so hungry for it, man. They want it, but they need to see it through example. They need to have this interaction that's close-knit, the fellowship that's close-knit to check up on. It's dirty work. You're going to have guys who say yes, and then they don't, and then yes, and then they don't. And that fellowship, that discipleship, that mentorship, that's where the hard work is, man. You got to hold their hand through it, until they get used to some calluses on their hands and everything, and then the light goes off, and they'll carry that on. Like you said, it's that legacy thing that we're trying to implement to let the world see the light as they begin to grow, and they see this generation make the better choices, and that generation is able to go without the new car and the new house and all of the new clothes and everything, but they actually are more fulfilled. And these kind of indications to society is us reclaiming our heritage as men and women of faith.
Yeah, I can't speak enough about the fasting too, and like I try to turn some guys onto it, but like bodybuilders, like, oh, I'm gonna lose muscle. I was like, no, actually, every time I come back stronger than ever, I lose a little bit of fat. And by the way, there's all these other processes like apoptosis, autophagy that occurs, where you're actually like anti-aging. You're turning back the clock on your body when you fast. Your body actually turns back the clock. You make new stem cells. All the old garbage that you put in your cells, all those old misfolded proteins, they get consumed. Your body actually, that's the way we're meant. We're meant to starve every once in a while. Like, we need to do this. And as Christians, as men, we need to put ourselves in those positions so we can handle ourselves and realize that that's the way God made it. This is the way he did it. And that's where the fruit is. If you don't bend over, open up the land, get your nails dirty, and you don't get a sunburn on your back, and then cover that dirt up, you don't get any fruits, man.
Yeah, I see a lot of anxiety with the younger guys. They want to know their anointing. It's like, what's my anointing? What has God specifically made me to do? And I like to use like the coral reef. Like, God obviously likes to have an eclectic, diversified, look at all these beautiful little fishes. Like, there's no reason why this coral has to be so beautiful and all these little fishes so ornate and gorgeous colored, and they're all flowing together, and it's just like, this is the most beautiful image you can see. And so you see yourself fitting into God's world, and the young, like, what's my anointing? How am I special? And it's so important to push home the idea that the leadership, the mouthpiece, the body being an organism that God sees much differently than we do. Like, the mouthpiece, everybody's going to give attention to. The guy sitting on the podium, this hierarchy of importance, power, and influence is not what God sees. But there's a lot of anxiety involved with that. And I feel like when you fast, when you self-humiliate, you can get rid of that anxiety, because God's will is laid out for you in the book. And if you will follow those very tertiary things, we don't even pay attention to them because we're so preoccupied with like the star at the top of the Christmas tree. It's like those little branches on the way up. If you'll do that, that anxiety and that need to identify in your anointing, so to speak, it kind of becomes the process that's important.
It's like
the process
said,
by
like
doing
if you
those
have a
things.
stutter, write that poetry.
I love that.
And
I love that. Especially if you have a desire for poetry, right?
It's like the beauty that we see today. Like, all these girls all look like Kim Kardashian, every single one of them. It's like the standard of beauty is uniqueness, and it's also for a purpose, right? So it's like, yeah, she looks fertile. Yes, she has wide hips, a giant ass, and big breasts, and a symmetrical face. But at the same time, it's like, the standard of beauty for God is something that is progressing. It's
different.
growth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It is what happens afterwards. So like in order for us to, as Christians, to like incorporate that paradigm, it is those stutters. You know, it is these things, is this pushing forward, this faithfulness, you know, that allows us to pioneer the periphery.
I mean, so many times in the stories, it's God, look at Abraham, Moses with the stutter, Abraham with the son, your only son. Now you got to kill, right? It's like that's the test of faith, man. Look forward to it. We have to enjoy that, and it's always going to bring you right to the brink of you wanting to just disappear and die. And that's the whole point of it, is you do want to disappear and die, and God brings you out of it, not yourself, not anything you did. The faith that God gave, that he changes the heart. But so that's like the young guys. That's what I'm trying to tell them, man. Like, this is something to look forward to. Abraham's hand was shaking, all right? Abraham's hand was shaking. Moses talking to the crowds, he was frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know how to say it. He wanted to say it right. He wanted to flow like Aaron did, but he couldn't. You know, but he did it. And that's something beautiful that we got, man. That's something beautiful that we got, that the world doesn't got that. You know, they don't have that. I'll put a guy on the podium that stutters. You know, and we're going to say that's beautiful, not in the way that we say, like, you know, these models are beautiful when they're grotesque or anything like that. This is beautiful because it's inspired work of God. Yeah. And that's something that's not this cookie cutter church stuff that we have, where we have this insipid generation of unfortunately dead inside Christians. So
yeah, if you gave a Ferrari to someone in the 18th century, they would think it's the dumbest thing ever. There was not a single road that thing could go on and go fast. And its purpose didn't mean anything. So we need to cut those roads, and we need to welcome in that newness. And like you said, taking on the seed oils and being proactive about making heaven here on earth is going to be the motivating factor for the young men of that purpose of like, hey, this is the picture.
And I wanted to ask you one final question. I know we were going on 2 hours now. So really quick. As you've developed and you've come to this wonderful place where you're seeing the incarnation of Christ, and I see that very much being sort of the ministry you have. It definitely ministered to me. Like I said, it brought this nebulous idea from the background that I've been sort of grappling with into the forefront, where I could actually play with the tools.
Yeah.
So what is some of, like, if you had a syllabus that illustrates this material, what would you say? I mean, these are auxiliary things to obviously the gospel and the Bible itself, which says it, and it's there. I mean, obviously. But you brought up Gerard, I believe, some of these guys, these figures that you've used. Could you tell us a few of these resources?
Help guys with the syntax of like what's going on here. Like give them a bit of a
I mean, Rene Girard is certainly someone that folks can learn from. You can look up, there's interviews of him on YouTube where you can watch some of his ideas. What's your general audience usually at? Like, what's their age group? And
they're getting into Jordan Peterson. Some of them, the age group is very varied. So we have guys from like, in their mid-teens all the way up to like mid-40s. Some of the guys, they've been in church. They're like in there. We had some comments on a video past where a guy's, a grandpa, and he's talking to his grandkids about stuff.
A lot of manosphere guys, red pill guys, that are mostly 20 to 35. Yep. Single guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Some married guys.
So you need to just try to read the Bible with this framework of look at it in the theological way. But I think, like, for example, those high school age kids you should be unpacking mimetic desire for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. You should do 3-4 hour sessions of explaining, okay, in this situation in your life, why are you desiring this, and try to deconstruct some of those desires. Why are you dressing like this? Like, people don't want to talk about that. Why do you have the same haircut? Why do you have the same haircut? Understanding it doesn't mean you have to hate it. You're going to have mimetic desire one way or the other, but being aware of it, right, is being mindful of what you're doing. Like, why is it that you want that girl who's not as Christian or godly, but is considered, it's like, what was that Kanye song? I could have me a good girl and still be addicted to those hood rats, right? Like, this idea, why are you desirous of the hood rat? And in that sense, right? Why do you want that? Why do you want that which is hard to get? And is that rather that you're more interested in your peers, including other guys, and what they think of you more than the actual person that you're pursuing and the object of your desire, right?
Right. Fighting
like,
over the toy. You don't really care about
are you
the toy.
competing? Are you dating this girl because it'll give you social status in the view of the guys that you're competing with?
Yep.
Because if that's
you
the
actually
case,
like this girl.
yeah. Are you competing with the guys more than you are pursuing this person for who they are supposed, who they are? And in the same sense, if you think you're trad or whatever because you planted a carrot and your live action role playing, 1950s style dress, whatever. Like if that's what you're doing, that's not what it's about. Again, you're stuck in that Gen Z virtual role playing game world where it's a character change that takes time. And one thing I've learned is that cultivation. When I thought of cultivation, I used to talk about cultivation in my 20s, and I every time, and it's funny because I had work on a farm too for a little bit, not years, but I had a little bit of that experience. But still, cultivation as an image, I kept thinking of the pruning of like the leaves and the thorns and so forth on a bush. But that's just one small micro picture of cultivation. The harder part is that to get crops from good trees, sometimes it takes 10 years, or olive trees, longer sometimes. It takes a long time to get the fruit that you have cultivated. And it takes years sometimes to heal the soil. It takes years to get the microbiome in the soil the way it needs to be in harmony with all the different crops or animals and things that you're rotating, like my good friend Joel Saladin teaches on Polyface Farms, his farm in Virginia. Awesome. It takes years to understand this. And the same token, it takes years to guide those that you want to influence for good in relationship. It takes years to get them to fully understand what you're saying. And and also if you do it in bad ways, if you model bad examples of the gospel, bad examples of headship, bad examples of manosphere or whatever it is, being a man. If you model those things, you will notice that sometimes it'll be years until you see the fruits of your error, right? You know what I mean? So you'll do something wrong for a while, or you'll think or have a wrong approach to something, and you won't see the results of that for years down the road. So in the meantime, because you're not getting an immediate feedback, you don't realize that you are doing a thing in a way that is not going to be long-term sustainable, right? And so if you plant a-hole behavior, you will get a-hole behavior back at you. And that's the same thing with your audience as a podcast or whatever. If you get your greatest hits from some, title you say in the algorithm destroys, if that's how you got to your 1 million subscribers, right. You'll be owned and controlled by that if you want to sustain your lifestyle or whatever that you've come to experience, because you're also going to get caught up, by the way, fighting with once you get to 1 million subscribers, you're going to be like, what about the guy with 3 million, 10 million, 50 million, 20 million? How do I get more closer to that? It'll be never ending, right? So when you embrace the world's perspective of weakness, like, again, to the glory of God, right? With that guy who's a paralyzed, or is it a blind man, when he said, whose fault was this man for being blind, right? Is it his parents' sin? Is it his sin? And he's like, no, it's to the glory of God because I've healed him today, right? So he's showing out. He's saying, the reason why he's blind is because in this story, I'm going to heal him, and it's going to be a down payment on the salvation of the world, and it will be a glory to my Father, and that's why he's blind. It's for this moment of transformation and healing to be an example of the power of God. So you have authority in that power, in that healing, in the signs and wonders. And so, I think people should re-look at physics. I think physics needs to be examined. That's why I do, for years, a Science and You segment with my chief science advisor and physicist, Dr. Yu, who's created what I believe to be a more accurate model, a more accurate map of the world of the atom and everything in the universe in a physical sense. And I think that when we get our maps more accurate, you could get a crude map that told you there was no new world. And then you think you're headed to India, and that's why they called it the West Indies, and things like that. These people who were early, explorers and so forth. They didn't have the right map guiding what they were doing. Once they got the map started to be established, they could start to make it more and more accurate, and it allowed people to chart even more in that new world. And I would say that our physics is an example of something that has been rarefied because of social status issues rather than actually being true in terms of it's actually being accurate to the way the world is. And I think that if you look at like Marvel, science fiction and so forth, they're always referencing quantum this, quantum that, which shows you that most of our physics that we're afraid to question is actually science fiction. It's actually really good for hallucinatory fantasy. It's not actually real physics. Now, see, I say that knowing that it's considered extreme taboo to say that. They say don't talk about religion or politics at dinner. We don't talk about physics in public life if you want to be considered a legitimate, sophisticated person to consider as a serious individual. I understand that, and that's why I poke that taboo intentionally, repeatedly, because I'm like, no, I think there's something there. I've seen enough evidence. I've seen enough with the work I do both on screen and off screen with Dr. Yu in researching a more accurate picture of the physical world, which will allow us to do things like elemental transmutation, taking trash and then using magnetic fields to then turn them into rare earth elements so that we don't have to dive into the belly of the earth in a conflict zone in Africa and fight with other empires over access to these rare earth deposits, that we could actually make those rare earths from trash and recyclable material, literally farming trash and making it into gold, turning trash into gold. I believe that I've seen enough evidence in my investigation of the matter to believe that it is a real thing, and that Christians who love their families and love their wives and love their communities and have self-emptying and don't care if they have 10 views on a video or 10 million, those kind of people will be the ones that inherit the earth, because they'll be the ones who don't take the social mimetic cues to shut up when they realize physics is bankrupt. And those will be the ones that, if people can come around them and support them and help them in various different ways, whether it's funding, whether it's finding engineers who will carry out experimentation and then scale it up and look for application in industry. That's what it means to be a Christian. It means, wait a second, there's a problem in our world. They're still doing ritual human sacrifice in the form of wars and sanctions and so forth and so on. They're still relying on Epstein Island. Dear God, we don't want to have a government that does that. We have to get past this primitiveness. We have to get past this stuff. And that gives young 15-year-old kids who are playing Minecraft something to get excited about. Yeah. Go help someone create elemental transmutation. Just don't burn yourself. Use gloves or whatever it is. Get in there in that microwave and figure out how that's working. Just don't let yourself get microwaved in the process. But don't be a chicken. Don't stay and play video games your whole life and miss out on the opportunity to actually see trash and then pick it up and see gold with the naked eye. Let that not be a thing that you miss out on. Like, go and do it. And don't be intimidated by the fact that it seems a little bit too pie in the sky, because if you can just be the greatest barber, hell, that's a heck of a golden talent too, because
agreed.
Like me who are a little bit kooky, I got a friend of mine who gave me a good barbershop haircut the other day. And I tell you what, it's getting a lot of people to be able to receive my message a little bit better.
Nice. Gotta get that Einstein hair.
Exactly. Sometimes you have to understand how to use, like Nikola Tesla. He was the best dressed man in the world. That's a thing I had to do. If you look at my older videos, I had long hair and a little bit like that. And then I had a friend of mine. I said, I kind of want to keep the long hair. Is it time to stop this? And he said, David, long hair, I don't know what your haircut is, so I'm not, but he said, long hair, that
we got long hair.
That kind of indicates wildness, right? And he said, David, you're already pretty wild and intense as a person, that you could probably dial that back with a more normie haircut, and it would probably help, not over salt the salt. Now that everybody has their own balance, and it's all subjective, right? This is all mimetic kind of silly, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think it's great. Jesus fed the 5,000 with the fishes. I mean, we're all about miracles and what's impossible, and that's our initiative. And a Christian should not be afraid of that. That. And when he says you're going to do more works than I do, like, we're doing a lot of this stuff through technology. We're healing people.
That's right, but
it's already happening.
Yeah, but once you become aware of it, then you can play into it in a way that is into the glory of God, right? Like, once you understand, okay, in 2009, they all had the haircut like the emo, and now they don't. And once you start seeing that, if you see it you don't have to be unconsciously enslaved by it, but you can participate it with an intentionality to direct it towards something good. And that's what I'm trying to say is that I've thought to myself, why is this way? Why is that this way? And it's like, well, there's a reason for these things. It's part of the story that God's crafting about your life, which is really just a reflection of this greater cosmic story of Jesus's life as he wins history, as he wins humanity
Amen.
over to the full creation potential that it always had from the very beginning. And so what we're trying to do is get rid of the lunchroom drama. Right. And the reason you're like, why are women floundering? Because their men keep looking at lunchroom drama as the reaction. Like they think it's bold and masculine to make videos about Epstein Island all day, which is still just sitting in the peanut gallery of life. Right. Yeah. If you don't want Epstein Island, create low temperature nuclear energy and don't be afraid if you get shot in the process. Move it down the field of life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you may get assassinated, bro. I mean, there's a reason. I think, the reason why I didn't, I think God has his own way of like how he's going to unfold these things. And I understand like there is power in being hidden in a manger, right? There's power in being hidden in things that are lowly, right? You're able to receive a message and it's able to reverberate in a way that protects the message in case you get taken out. You can start to lean into life that way and be more aware of what God may be doing in your life that may not be on the time scale that you want because you want a certain comfort or you want a certain thing. But realizing that that's not going to make you happy.
Yeah, and have the faith. Have the faith of Abraham, right? You're gonna progenerate and be the seeds of the sand. He's alive in heaven, and he's seeing it now, right? We're gonna have that long-sightedness. We're gonna have that patience, that humility to connect with that. The desires, put them aside, and say, what are the needs in the world? I'm willing to be martyred for these things. So I see that. I see that symbolism in Scripture with the Canaanites, right? They're sinning and sinning and sinning, and it had to wait till it came to fulfillment, till they were judged. All of these things happen at a precise time, so have joy and have peace in knowing that they will be fulfilled. And, on our next podcast, I cannot wait to get into more of that sort of stuff where you're talking about the physics. And this is the stuff that's going to interest the young guys too, of like, get off the Minecraft. You can be a part of this Marvel-like mystery, these comic stories. All of the excitement is there. So I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for being on the podcast today, David. Learned so much from you, man, and I'm looking forward to forging a better relationship. We're Florida boys. We're here in Sarasota. You're welcome to come over to our studio and hang out with us. Sure. Yeah. We'll eat some food together, hang out and have a good time.
Have a whiskey.
And get nerdy with it. Have a whiskey, whatever. That'd be great. So, and thank John too, the guy who I've been corresponding with, your assistant there. Thank you so much to your team and what you're doing, man. We appreciate it.
Let's get together again. This is like you are cut from the same cloth we are. You're right in here with us. We've been able to paint this picture together, and I can't tell you how encouraging it is to have found you and that pod. I was so excited. I was like mind blown, excited. I was like, holy shit! Forgive my language, but like, there's finally another dude out here that's thinking about these things and talking.
And there's tons of them, guys. I know that. There's a lot of us out there, and it's just like bringing that background forward. It's the way God works, and sometimes it's a firework, other times it's a slow burn. And either way, we're going to be happy with it. So thank you so much, David. Would you like to give the audience where they can find you, any of those basic little things you can add in?
You can email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's aneighborschoice.com. So hello@aneighborschoice.com if you want to stay in touch or interact with what we're doing, ask questions or anything like that. And our website there has the different shows we do. It's kind of like a constellation of programs. We have Seed Oil Survival, which is my running thing, investigating nutrition, not just seed oil, but that is kind of the theme. That's a good scapegoat to have that unites people. And then we do Things Hidden, which is more anthropology, A Neighbor's Choice, which is more news, current events oriented. And then we have a series called The Science, which looks at the pandemic stuff. That stuff's going to get you flagged on this platform here, but we got our channel deleted because of that kind of stuff. But
nice,
look, that's the best way to stay in touch. Or you can, if you like the audio podcast, just search for my name, David Gornoski, on whatever podcast platform you listen to, and appreciate your support.
Right on. Thanks. You. And shout out to good Star-Lord and Bill Clinton Touch Me.
Yeah,
Bill
thanks,
Clinton.
guys.
Yeah, you guys are rock stars. We love you boys.
Yep.
Let's do this again, David.
Yep.
Thank
Blessings,
you.
brother.